All right, good evening. It is 7 o'clock, and we will call this meeting to order. Roll call will show that all 5 board members are present. Ms. Noelle Georgianish is joining us virtually this evening, and our 2 student representatives are here. Has this meeting been posted, Dr. Amidzik?
Yes, it has.
All righty. At this time, I invite you to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Dr. Midzik, is there communication you'd like to share tonight?
Yes, there is. Today, and we'll be talking about it during the commendations, Charlie Schmitzdorf and Tyler Bellotta, both 10th graders, learned that they were selected as the winning team of the 1st District Congressional App Challenge. I'm sure they'll tell us a little bit about it during the commendation. Congressman Steele was here this morning to personally award the students for their outstanding achievement. To correlate with their economics unit and social studies, 3rd graders at Canterbury hosted a winter market in mid-December. Students were presented with a few different craft project options, and based on their choice were placed into groups. Each group created a business plan, made a list of needed materials, and based on the cost of materials, set a price for their product. Over the last couple of weeks, they have been busy creating products in their groups. Classes were invited to browse through the market and purchase products. After repaying the cost of materials, the profit will go toward building a little free library in front of Canterbury Elementary. We had several other communications specifically on agenda items that I will share when those agenda items are discussed this evening. The following donations were made to the Greendale Park and Recreation Department from October 9th through December 3rd. Bloom and Grow wish list products donated by Lauren Bauer and RJ, and also by Scott Bowe. Fall 2021 paper shredding event costs donated by J&J Contractors, LLC. 2021 Movies in the Park and Halloween event costs donated by the Ryman Foundation, Inc. And Greendale Community Theater received a $100 anonymous donation. Wellens Tree Farm donated $1,000 for tree lot sales at Gazebo Park for the 2021 season. And finally, a $5,000 donation from Carolee Butler was made to the GHS robotics team. On behalf of the district, we'd like to thank her for her kindness and generosity, as well as all the others who made donations. So that concludes my communications.
All right, thank you, Dr. Midzik. At this time, we do have some students that I see in the audience tonight that will be recognizing them for some of their achievements, including the high school girls swim team, the computer programming team, and the First Tech Challenge. So the first group that we'd like to recognize is the Greendale girls swimming team on an undefeated conference season and an outstanding showing at the WIAA state meet. The girls varsity swimming team was undefeated in all conference duels, were the conference relay champions for the 2nd year with 2 new meet records set by the team. They were the conference champions for the 3rd consecutive year in a row, with 6 athletes earning accolades of 1st or 2nd team all conference. The girls were also sectional champions for the 2nd consecutive year. The girls were also sectional champions for the 2nd year, qualifying all relays and 6 individual swims for the WIAA state meet. At the state meet, senior Jocelyn Zagala placed 5th in the 200 free and 4th in the 100 free, breaking the Greendale pool record set by Katerina Stanek in 2020. Kate Turner finished 11th overall in her 200 medley and 5th overall in her 500 free, breaking a Greendale pool record set by her teammate Jocelyn Zagala last year. Michaela Mayer placed 14th overall in her 100 free, and Chloe Yerkes placed 15th overall in her 100 fly. The 200 medley relay, made up of Hannah Mellock, Kate Turner, Chloe Yerkes, and Michaela Mayer, placed 12th overall. And the 400 free relay, made up of Jocelyn Zagala, Kate Turner, Chloe Yerkes, and Michaela Mayer, placed 5th overall. To end the season, the Woodland Conference voted for Jocelyn Zagala to win her 4th consecutive Woodland Conference Swimmer of the Year award. So at this time, I'd like to invite any of the members of the Greendale girls swim team up for a presentation. Another round of applause. Thanks. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Our next group of students is being recognized for their co-curricular work in robotics and technology. So we are proud to congratulate GHS senior Megan Volkening on being recognized as one of the 2020-2021 First Tech Challenge Dean's List Award winners. Megan is a member of the GHS robotics team, Graffiti. The students who earned first Dean's List Award are great examples of student leaders who have led their teams and communities to increased awareness for FIRST and the mission. These students have also achieved personal technical expertise and accomplishments. Congratulations, Megan, tonight.
Megan can't join us this evening, but we'll make sure that she gets her award and we'll follow up with her.
All right, great. And then also in that area, GHS sophomores Charlie Smitsdorf and Tyler Bellata were selected as the winning team of the first District Congressional App Challenge. The Congressional App Challenge was created by Congress, recognizing that STEM skills, particularly those surrounding coding and computer sciences, are essential for America's continued economic growth and technology innovation. The House of Representatives knows how crucial these skills are and wants to encourage students to engage in these fields. By encouraging and recognizing our nation's young programming talent, Congress hopes to shine a light on the growing importance of these skills. Charlie and Tyler received their official awards today from Congressman Steele here at Greendale High School. So congratulations on the team's achievements. So we invite Charlie and Tyler up.
I think Charlie and Tyler should give a quick overview of their app. Just a quick explanation.
So for the challenge, you're supposed to, you had a lot amount of time. You had, I think, about like 6 months to create a app, whether it be like a game or just some utility. We decided to create a game, and we called it Roboto. The goal of the game is to get as many points as you can within a certain amount of time. You get points by building up a city, which in order to build the city, you need resources. You explore an island and gather resources while building up your city in such a way so that certain buildings are near each other and away from other buildings, because people don't like living next to factories and they'd prefer to live next to parks and nice lakes and oceans.
Is the app downloadable or for sale or?
It's a web app, which means you just need to go to a link to use it.
Okay, could you send that to the school board? Take a look at it?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, awesome. I would like to see it. Is it?
One more round of applause for all of our student athletes and student participants. All right, excellent. Congratulations again. Continuing on, comments and questions. So if there's any comments or questions from visitors this time, persons wishing to address the board are asked to state their name and address for the record and limit their comments to 1 time per meeting and limit their comments to 3 minutes per time. So I invite you to the podium. Good evening.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Rebecca Kay from the M section, and I'm here to provide an update of the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction district report cards for the school year of 2020 through 2021. As a district, Greendale received the glowing score of 73.6, which is exceeding expectations. But the state superintendent of public instruction, Jill Underley, changed the grading scale this year and made the curve easier for a school to receive a passing grade. In the past, for a school district or school to qualify as having exceeding expectations, a minimum score of 73 was required. This year, the minimum score to reach exceeding expectations was 70. Greendale's report card of 73.6 equates to a C within the Greendale School District reporting system, which indicates just an average score. Greendale School District is just average, and that is not acceptable. Majority of Greendale school-age children, about 90%, are in the proficient or basic competency level for both English and mathematics, which indicates that children are only working at or even below the current grade level. These children require an appropriate education program that provides the education basics so they too will have the opportunity for education excellence and excelling right into the above proficiency level. There are about 10% of Greendale students that are currently at the advanced level for both English and mathematics. These students should also have appropriate education levels, education classes. For instance, opportunities for honors and or advanced classes to continue their education growth instead of being brought down to a proficient level like most Greendale students. Let's get back to the report card score. The Greendale District report card scores have decreased over the past 5 years, but more drastically, a 5.4 percentage score drop since Kim Amidzik was appointed as the Greendale School Superintendent in March of 2020. Since the scores has decreased under the current school superintendent, I am completely disappointed in Kim's decisions and programs and how the Greendale School Board has followed the school superintendent instead of listening to who you really work for, the Greendale community. Please go back to teaching the fundamentals of education, such as history, arithmetic, spelling, English, reading, social studies, critical thinking, etc. Stop teaching children what to think, but how to think. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Nicole Lapont. I live in the East section. It's time to end the madness of allowing COVID to continue to ruin the learning and the attendance in our schools. Let's give back parents the freedom and the relief when calling a student out ill to not have to worry about getting a call from district officials to discuss symptoms. COVID is here to stay. Many are vaccinated if they have chosen. Let's move on. The updated safety plan needs to eliminate close contact, contact tracing, and test to stay policies. District nurses should only need to notify of a close contact of a positive case, advise to watch for symptoms, and move to the next. This allows those who are without symptoms to have zero interruption in attendance and learning, and ends discrimination and segregation of those who are not vaccinated. I urge this board to start moving Greendale schools forward in the right direction, like every other neighboring district in the area. I'd also like to bring to your attention that the school district, Park and Rec, and Department of Health has turned off commenting on their major social media platforms. Based on my research, none of the surrounding districts have removed commenting on the same platforms. You are purposely eliminating engagement of district families, the community, and beyond. Even the Greendale School mission statement encourages such engagement, and I quote the mission statement, "All students belong and are empowered to learn, grow, and engage as part of a global community." Let's stop hiding and cowarding from our peers. Not all engagement should be assumed as negative.
And we will be discussing the school safety plan later on in the agenda. Good evening.
Good evening. Amanda, live in the M section. I came here tonight because I wanted to sincerely thank you for putting extra safety measures in place, specifically universal masking, long enough for 5 to 11-year-olds to become vaccinated. I spoke at the initial safety plan meeting and asked you to please consider all kids' safety until parents have the option to vaccinate and give them an added layer of protection. I know it was not an easy decision, but you kept your word, and all of my school-age children are now fully vaccinated, and I wanted to thank you. I suspect the plan to end universal masking went from 60% vaccinated to 50% to a current proposed full elimination because it's becoming increasingly clear that vaccine hesitancy has taken hold and we are at an impasse. I understand that everyone is tired, and at some point we need to part ways with all the extra safety measures and assume anyone who is not vaccinating is aware of and at peace with the risk of worst-case scenario happening to their child or their family. The issue I have tonight is with the timing of the change and the message that it sends. I am hoping you can clarify this evening how the data provided in the slides supports removing any current safety measures, as well as how you plan to protect students not yet eligible to be vaccinated. Enrollment in the Greendale School District does not begin at age 5. I do not see anything in the new plan that addresses Greendale's time for learning, early childhood, and special education services, which begin at age 3. Enrollment for these programs currently totals 110 children, and none of these children are eligible to receive a vaccine. Removing universal masking in the elementary schools right now sends a clear message that these kids do not hold as much value. Being a special needs parent, you always have to worry about your child being able to fully access their education given their differing abilities. The district providing an at-risk learning environment should not have to be one of those concerns. And any special needs parent, teacher, paraprofessional will tell you in-person learning is the only way for these kiddos to excel. The latest data projects the vaccine for 2 to 5-year-olds should be approved in the second quarter of 2022. This projection takes into account the recent delay. It is not unreasonable to consider the same level of protection for these kids until that time, considering they share facilities and staff with grades K-5 through 5th, and the Omicron variant has proven itself to be highly contagious. Greendale prides itself on inclusion, and I am asking tonight that we include all children in the updated safety plan.
Thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be discussing the safety plan later on in the agenda. Good evening.
Good evening. Fred Clement, 6711 Daffodil Lane. I'm a 6th grade teacher over at Greendale Middle School, and I have 2 students of my own over at the high school, one of who's concerned tonight that I'm going to be a Karen at the board meeting, so I'm sure her that I will not be. And I'm not here to talk about all the numbers and all the stats and all the figures. What I do want to talk about is what it looks like on the ground floor in a classroom. I think we can all agree kids that have COVID need to be quarantined. They need to, stay away and test negative and return. The problem is right now we're putting kids into quarantine that are not sick, and they don't have COVID and they don't have symptoms. And I know that we're trying to be as cautious as possible. They could get it. They were in close contact, but. And plus, if they're at home, they can join the class virtually. It doesn't work the way that it sounds. It really doesn't. What I do when I teach virtually is I sit behind my computer, okay? I put one earbud in my ear, and I connect that to my computer through Bluetooth so I can hear the kids at home. And then I kind of look over my computer and I teach. And instead of being up at the board and walking around and engaging with students, I'm behind a screen and I'm writing on it. It's kind of like this. If you're talking to your teenage kid and they're on their phone talking to their friend, but they're also talking to you, so they talk to them and then they kind of look up and they talk to you. What happens is the kids at home become disengaged because I'm not fully present for them. And the kids in the classroom are becoming disengaged because I'm not fully interacting with them. And it's doing a disservice to kids at home, and it's doing a disservice to the kids in the classroom. And and by the time the kids come back, they all tell me, oh yeah, I never had COVID, I never was sick, I was just at home quarantined. A lot of the kids at home don't log in. I'm not saying that because, as a slight to them, they don't enjoy the virtual learning. They're not getting much out of it. So I'm here to strongly urge the board to make quarantining a voluntary. If you're sick, if you have symptoms, stay home, get tested, do all the right things. But if you're not, please stop making the kids stay home and participate virtually. As for masks, I fully support also making that making that optional as well, recommended. The vaccine's available for kids. They can, if parents want, they can get vaccinated. If kids wear masks to school, that's totally fine. But if you saw the way 6th graders wear masks I think a lot of people would realize we're fooling ourselves. There's gaps on the sides, they're down around their chins. It's a constant battle. When the kids go to a restaurant, when they go to the Pfizer Forum, when they hang out with friends, no one's telling them to wear masks, but we at school are making them wear masks for 6 hours a day. And I think it needs to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hello, I'm Erin from the robotics team. Some of my teammates and I spoke at the last school board meeting about getting funds for our team through the ESSER program. I'm here today to request that the board allocate funding to the robotics team. This money will go toward our capital expenses, including a field to run our robot on, tools, setting up our workshop, computer hardware and electronics, a competition pit display, and establishing a parts inventory. Further details can be found in the budget email to all school board members. We want to share some things about our team's members' different activities. First, our team members are exposed to a variety of different skills and develop technical skills to help them prepare for future careers. Our programmers learn advanced Java programming skills. Our CAD team learns how to design custom parts and assemble mechanical components. Our electrical team learns the ins and outs of wiring systems, and our mechanical team learns how to brainstorm, design, and build robots. Our business team, along with other team members, also does STEM outreach events for the community. This summer, our team hosted a first LEGO League Explore Camp, starting 6 new elementary robotics teams for over 30 Greendale students. Our team members each coach a team of younger students through a week of fun robotics activities. We also help mentor the first LEGO League teams at Canterbury and the middle school. Our team has created a total of 600 STEM kits that have been distributed to students across the Milwaukee area, including at Boys and Girls Clubs, at the Ronald McDonald House, Milwaukee Charter Schools, and within Greendale. Last year, our team read STEM-related books to over 650 students and told them about the first robotics programs. As a team, it is our goal to not only have a great experience ourselves, but also to impact as many other students as possible by sharing STEM with them. We would greatly appreciate your help by providing us with ESSER funding so that we can not only develop our skills for our future, but also help many other students do the same. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments tonight.
Well written and well delivered, Aaron.
Good evening.
Good evening, Heather Miller, M section. As a parent of elementary students, I'm here to speak to the agenda item 4.2. I asked the board to adopt optional masking for grades K through 6 as suggested, but immediately upon return from winter break in January. This issue needs a critical look at the data, specific to our children and our schools. Trusting science includes trusting data and outcomes. The data shows that masking has had minimal impact in our schools. The district's objectives have also been ever-changing. Initially, it was to prevent the spread of illness, and we relied on metrics to justify that. Then it morphed into only for elementary students until a vaccine became available. Presently, even though the vaccine is available and has been so long enough for children to become fully vaccinated, it's tied to an arbitrary number of 60% of students, a percent that's higher than any county in Wisconsin presently has for children with 1 dose. However, my one hesitation in asking for this is that removing the mandate likely means exposing elementary families to the ridiculousness we've heard about from so many families in upper grades. Late notifications about exposure, excessive school being missed, testing difficulties, and preferential treatment. Elementary schools currently function on the ruse that no close contact ever exists, so students at least stay in school because they're masked. But masking children is not a justification to avoid the problem we have of needless quarantines, as you've already heard tonight from people even within the school. Both issues need to be resolved concurrently. Actual data does not justify masking. If you look at their data through early October, there's 1 in 196 students that tested positive. If you look at the 7 weeks of test to stay data, of 105 tests, 1 positive result, 1. Further, according to the school district's memo, no students became positive after their 7-day testing window, and there were no secondary cases of COVID from the test to stay. How can we justify quarantining children longer than that 7 days? We also have months of data now showing upper grades with optional masking and lower grades with mandatory masking. If masks are impactful, we should see a big difference in the numbers, right? K through 6, mandatory, 3.5%. 7 through 12, optional, 2.1%. Mandatory masking yielded only a 1.4% difference between the two categories. Is that enough to justify all the downsides these children are experiencing from being masked? The learning, social, emotional impacts, dental skin problems you've heard about, breathing difficulties, the inability of speech pathologists to see their students' mouths while they work with them, and many more.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Zach Eiger on Municipal Square. Dear members of the school board, as you consider revisions to the health safety plan in tonight's meeting, please understand that no staff members have contacted me in support of these changes, and many have told me that they are concerned. Our district implements fewer mitigation strategies than other area schools, and if we allow optional masking K6 and stop enforcing quarantines or tests to stay, we'll be left with none. This seems like an irresponsible shift to make as cases in our district rise, available ICU beds in our state dwindle, and filling positions of staff out ill continues to prove challenging. I urge you to keep two details in mind that are underemphasized in the safety report you will hear tonight. One, the number of cases that we have detected in quarantine students seems to be encouraging and indicate that quarantines are more cautious than necessary. Unfortunately, we only know about the 38% of students who did test, and our actual number of positive cases could be much higher. Number two, the high percentage of Greendale residents that have received at least one dose of vaccination is a good thing. That being said, protection against the Omicron variant seems to be only effective after full vaccination, including a booster. Using this inflated vaccination percentage to inform fewer mitigation strategies will expose weakly vaccinated people to a more contagious strain of COVID-19. So with incomplete testing data and an overestimation of effective vaccination, I do not think that we can currently defend ceasing implementation of the few mitigation strategies that we currently employ. What I think would serve our students, staff, and community best is laying out a strategy to effectively and continuously gather the data necessary to make timely and systematic changes to our COVID safety plan. If we knew how many cases of COVID were in our schools, I think that teachers could agree with increasing and decreasing mitigation efforts depending on the current landscape. Both of these proposed changes pose greater risks to our students while offering no gains. Neither change meets CDC guidance. The reason that we are also engaged is because we value the education of our students. We agree that we want all students to leave Greendale schools curious and prepared for whatever education lies ahead. How proud would we be if one of our students advanced through the levels of education until they were deemed an expert and trusted with making informed recommendations about public health? And yet, it is experts like these who we continue to ignore because doing something is more difficult than doing nothing. This sends a troubling message to our students about our value of their safety and expertise in general. What is the point of cultivating excellence in them if misplaced anger will supersede any expertise? Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Megan Lippold. I live in the H section, and I'm also here in support of making masks optional in the elementary schools January 31st as outlined in your proposed safety plan. And I appreciate the mid-year look at it instead of waiting until the end of the year. The only difference at the beginning of the school year between the high school was the availability of vaccination, and early November the vaccine became available for kids 5 and up. The date has given families enough time to have their kids fully vaccinated if they've chosen to do so. The 60% vaccination requirement that was created by you needs to be dismissed, as it's not right to hold the elementary schools at a different level than everybody else. There was never a percentage that was required for 7th grade and up, and they've been optional since the beginning of the year. I spent time this weekend looking at all the nearby districts' dashboards, and hopefully maybe you've done the same. Just to name a few, New Berlin, Muskego, Waukesha, East Troy, Germantown, they've all had masks optional since the beginning of the year, and some of them actually did last year, maybe all of them at the very end of the year. And looking at their numbers, if you look at their dashboards, they break it down by school, their numbers are very similar to ours. I mean, almost the same. And some of those districts are way bigger than Greendale, too, and they've got the same amount of numbers. I haven't had to deal with the quarantines because I only have kids in elementary school, but I've talked to a lot of people who have, and have talked to people whose kids have missed a lot of school. These districts that I named, they don't have required quarantines. It's all recommended if they're feeling ill. Their families are notified if their child is a close contact, and they move on. If the child ends up not feeling well or tests positive, then they obviously stay home. They haven't kept their kids out of school like we have. The amount of school missed due to quarantines is unacceptable, and our data shows the low percentage of kids testing positive after they've been a close contact in school. So now's the time to start moving this district forward, or we never will. Thanks.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi. I'm short. Oh, I'll just stand up. My name is Keegan Taylor. I live in the L section. So I started writing my remarks at like 6:25 tonight, and that was after picking up kids from school or ushering them through schoolwork and preparing and serving dinner, which would be too late if you adopt this policy of having people submit their thoughts 4 hours ahead of time. And clearly there's a lot of people that have things to say, and I think a lot of people would have a hard time planning ahead like that. I have a lot of friends. So I'm a meticulous planner and an obsessive writer, and so theoretically I'm the perfect demographic to be a shoo-in for getting my comments approved and accepted. But I wouldn't have been able to do it tonight. And I have friends who are more comfortable expressing themselves verbally without having to write out their thoughts. And then others who are just busy, and so like if they even make it to the meeting, that would be, they should still be able to share their thoughts. I already emailed you all about it, so you're aware of my thoughts, but I got in response to the comment about October 25th, and I did go and watch the school board meeting, and I understand that the emotions were intense. I understand that you felt personally attacked and you felt defensive. The more I see the inner workings of our community, the more I see that there are active things that the leadership can do better. You were uncomfortable for 30 minutes. You were frustrated that your character was attacked because you marched for the thin blue line in a counter-protest. It was hard to be in a room full of angry people and to be yelled at. But I feel that you continue to focus on the end behavior and not on what is going on under the surface. What actions do the predominantly white people of our community continue to take that are insufferable and cause this frustration and hurt and anger to bubble to the surface? If I were in your shoes, I would be marching with groups like Page. I'd be marching with a sign that said Black Lives Matter, because I think there is a discrepancy that is highly problematic in our national and local community. I have to believe that participating in such a counter-protest comes from ignorance of the history of racism and the absolute need for anti-racism education activism in our community and in our country at large. I give you the benefit of the doubt. This policy is a Band-Aid on a wound that must be addressed at a deeper systemic level in a meaningful way. This policy is wrong. It will exclude people who have every right to speak in our community, who deserve to be heard, and who we need to hear from. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will be discussing that when we review the policy under agenda item 3. So thank you. Good evening.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Modal. I live in the A section. I just wanted to make 2 brief comments. Although I have never met the previous speaker, I also agree that requiring people to submit comments in writing 4 hours prior to the meeting can be a little bit onerous. I'm a big proponent of freedom of speech, and I really think that can, it might not sound like much to you, but it can prevent people from being able to communicate their concerns to the board. And in the interest of fairness and American traditions of democracy, I would encourage you to consider letting people come to a meeting and speak. The other concern I have is just regarding the safety plan in the elementary schools. One of the speakers mentioned that children under the age of 5 are still unable to be vaccinated. There's no option for them. So I just want to hold that I just would like you all to hold that in your hearts, that it's important to protect these children who are in the same building, in the elementary school buildings. I have a child at Canterbury. Masking's not fun. We all hate masking. I'm so done with masking, but I am still doing it for my child. It does work. I have a coworker who is in Waukesha, one of the districts with no masking. Her elementary children had their winter concert the same week as Canterbury did. And after our winter concert, we had 1 case of COVID. After their winter concert, they had 30 cases of COVID. The schools are almost exactly the same size. Masking works. We're all tired of it. Hopefully we won't have to do it much longer. I would ask you all to consider, instead of arbitrary markers, to use statistics based on reality of what's happening here where we live. Here where we live, 97% of ICU beds are occupied. That means if someone has a heart attack, gets in a car accident, has breast cancer, they can get turned away from the hospital because there is no space for them. There are people on the western side of the state driving hundreds of miles to get care. This is a crisis. It's important to consider to keep masking when we are in a surge. It's important to pay attention to the numbers. So I ask you to just consider that, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Hi,
Good evening.
I'm Tasha Hughes from the G section. Good evening. I'm here to urge you to vote against the proposed safety plan. The safety plan is based on the behavior of the Delta variant, which is no longer the dominant strain. As of today, the Omicron makes up 70% of new cases and is much more contagious. As I have read and have spoken with some medical professionals, that one person can infect up to 8 others. I understand that the current plan is expensive, time-consuming, and universal masking would fix both of those problems. But since masking has become so polarized, I'm assuming that level of protection is not on the table either. I wonder what your emergency plan is. Is there one? Several other districts returned to universal masking if cases are over a certain percentage or moved to remote learning. Schools have shut down due to high cases and not enough teachers. Merton is the latest example of a poor plan or no plan. You as a board have the job to protect the students as well as the teachers. You have teachers in this district who have health issues that result in poor outcomes when battling COVID. A recent statistic for pregnant women, which is startling, a 40% increase in death when sick with COVID. You have kids who cannot be vaccinated for various reasons as well. If you plan on removing all layers of protection except for airflow and hand washing, and you do not have an alternate plan for rising COVID cases and high teacher absenteeism, you will have failed at your job. While so many other places are canceling venues, adding restrictions to others, you are removing most everything. I understand that everyone is tired, but you have a responsibility to protect the district. One of Kim's slides shows positivity rates through the end of November. The slide at the time I viewed it did not show the month of December. Did you know that during 21-22 school, we've had 148 COVID cases, and 90 of those cases were in the past 3 weeks? Did you also know that the district is now seeing breakthrough COVID cases and spread among the classroom? Well, it has been stated that spread is less than 1%. I believe the statistic will increase. I can speak from personal experience. I have a child at home who is quarantined in our basement until December 28th. My child has had a breakthrough case and had only been to school and school-related activities for the past 10 days before becoming sick. It's really a bummer, but I guess we'll have to celebrate Christmas after Christmas. Mary and Kathy, you work in districts that universally mask and have implemented changes to the safety plan when the numbers become too high. MPS and Kenosha seem to have the safety of their students and teachers in mind. Don't the teachers and students of Greendale deserve the same? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Jason Sabrowski, 6030 Doyle. And I will ask, too, that, because there's quite a few more people, if you guys would add the additional time, because I know we're getting close to it, up front, so everyone can speak before you go in.
I'll make a move. I'll move right now.
Why don't we have Jason finish his speech, and then we can...
And please add 5 extra seconds on for that interruption.
I'm good, thank you. A couple of things this evening. First of all, thank you for all that you do. I really appreciate it. Regarding the 4-hour email that has to get sent in, I am against that too. With literally working 4 different jobs and 4 kids and basketball and just cheerleading and just literally everything in the sun, for someone to be able to do that, for me it'd be literally impossible. So I would never get the opportunity to speak in front of you guys. So I would be against that going forward. So there's that. Second, I know that there is the COVID topic on the agenda this evening. I am also, it seems like it's kind of almost 50-50 in here, but I am going to ask that you guys remove all the masks from the kids. Really the big thing 3-4 months ago when there was a lot of talk about this at these meetings, it was basically all being said, let's wait until our kids get the chance to get the vaccine. And then we don't care what you do at that point anymore as far as the masking. All the kids have had the chance to have the vaccine. Regarding the 3 and 4-year-olds I'm hearing a bit about, I'll just use Canterbury's example. I don't believe there's any 3rd or 4th graders or not 3rd or 4th, I'm sorry, 3 or 4-year-olds at Canterbury. I think it's literally just Highland View maybe that has a pre-4. So if that's something that they would have to just mask, the only thing I'll say against that is you can literally go to Greendale Play School and all their 3 and 4-year-olds do not mask in any of their classes. All of my kids went through there. My last one graduated last year from there. So I don't know how I feel about that. So I wouldn't be against that, but it's just an idea for people that are worried about the 3 and 4-year-olds. I would ask that all of the quarantining is gone away with immediately, being January 2nd, 3rd, when the kids come back to school, whatever that date is. I'll use my niece as an example. She's been quarantined 5 times. I actually had her mom reach out to you, Kathy. She has got tested. She's never got COVID once, but yet she's been quarantined 5 times now. She's at home right now. She's in 6th grade. She's wearing a mask, but yet she's still getting quarantined. This makes no sense to me. Because 6th graders have to wear a mask, correct? That happened like 2 months ago? Yeah. So why is she at home? So I guess that's what I'm going to ask from you guys. Thank you.
All right, thank you. How much time do we have left?
We are just at the 30-minute mark.
Okay, so I think, Mary, you were going to make a
Yeah,
reorder the agenda so that we group both comment sections at the beginning.
Yep. I would like to move. I would like to move that we reorder the agenda from agenda item 6 up to the top at this point in time.
I'll second.
I'm sorry. Can I also ask you to reorder the agenda so that our student report is brought up after the citizen comments?
Yep. All right. So I move that agenda item 6 be reordered to follow the current citizen comments, and then immediately afterwards, the student report. I don't see it on the agenda.
Agenda item 5.4.
Agenda item 5.4. Thank you. Occur at that time as well.
I'll second.
There's been a motion, a second, to reorder the agenda. Any further discussion? All right, and I'm going to call for a roll call vote. Mary?
Yes.
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 And then is Noel on the call?
Yes.
And I am yes, motion carries. So we will reorder the agenda, and we will continue on with citizen comments for an additional 30 minutes as outlined in agenda item 6. We will not then, therefore, continue with citizen comments at the end of tonight's meeting. Good evening.
Good evening, Ms. Kay, Greendale. I'm here to tell you that COVID is here to stay, period. It's not going anywhere. Quarantine needs to stop. Test to stay needs to stop. No more contact tracing. I work in the healthcare field. I can tell you that we have people in our facility that not only have had their first and second shot, they've also had boosters, and they're still coming into our facility sick. This is just what we have to live with. We have to deal with this. We don't quarantine kids when they have a flu. We don't quarantine kids when they have a cold. So I don't think that we should do it for this. This is here. It's not going anywhere. It's plain and simple. If there are people that live in this village that are still afraid of this disease, by all means, mask your child. I'm not against that. I don't think anybody here in Greendale is against that. But you also have to respect the fact of the parents in this community that choose not to vaccinate or to mask their children. That is a God-given American right. That is our right as a parent. It's not up to you. You're not medical professionals. Our healthcare is just an advisory. CDC is just recommending. So, you know, unless you are a full-fledged doctor. I work not only in the medical field, I work in retail. Most of you know where my other job is. When COVID started 2 years ago, I was exposed to COVID. My husband was exposed to COVID. I have to get tested weekly at my hospital. 10 times I've been tested, 10 times not detected. I know that at some point I've been exposed to COVID. I know that I have. My husband thinks he had it. My son thinks he may have had it. And it's simple as that. As far as our report card goes, very disappointed. School board, your job as a school board member, here, I will read you. First and foremost, school boards look out for students. Education is not a line item on the school board's agenda. It's the only item. School boards are accessible to public and accountable for the performance of their schools, and you are to ensure that the students get the best education for the tax dollars that are spent in this community. We are failing. We are failing. The only thing that's good out of this report card is our graduation rate. That's the only thing that is good. The only thing. We need to step it up. And just a little lesson to people about the word racism. If you look it up, racism is not about race. Racism actually started because of religion. Look it up. I did. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Good evening.
Hello, my name is Heather Godley. I live in the M section. Last time you met, I raised significant concerns about the proposed policy limiting public comments. I remain extremely concerned with your proposed changes and urge all of you to vote against the restriction of public comments. In the policy committee members' attempts to push their personal agenda on this board, you have not fully considered how this will affect the board's relationship with the community. My concerns include, but aren't limited to, the following. First, this policy, as you have it written, will make it impossible for anyone who does not have a Google email address to make a public comment during a school board meeting. That seems very problematic. Second, by limiting comments to just citizens, you are excluding people who have a compelling interest, such as grandparents who may reside in a different community, experts who may be able to contribute different and valuable perspectives, and Greendale High School alumni. Third, requiring citizens to pre-register will stop many parents, students, and community members from speaking and silence those valuable perspectives. I typically write my comments Friday night after I read the agenda and all the policies and everything that's proposed in the agenda and the reports. Maybe I get to it on Saturday. I'm not going to have a problem with this. But there are a lot of people in our community that aren't used to doing this, that aren't, you know, it's not a common thing. It's not a comfortable thing to come up and talk to the board. And I don't think you should exclude those people who are coming up for the first time or maybe the second time or have something that they really want to share with you in person. If you feel you must change the policy, I ask that you use the language proposed in the rule that persons wishing to speak are requested to pre-register but not required. I would further ask that after those who have pre-registered had spoken, any additional persons present are invited to address their comments to the board. Finally, it seems to me that you've rushed into these changes so quickly that, at least in my reading of it, you don't seem to realize that there are contradictory statements in the same paragraph of the policy, where at the top it states, as it used to, that there will be 2 periods. And then it seems to me that later on, you have added that comments will only be allowed at the beginning of the meeting 1 time. Now, I may be reading this incorrectly, but it seems to me that that is a very troubling indication of your rush to do this without actually considering the full impact of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hello, I'm Carol Ann Burroughs from the R section. This is my first time commenting, so I am definitely nervous, but I did feel like I wanted my perspective on the 4-hour ahead registration restrictions to be noticed, I guess. So I am a stay-at-home mom. I'm blessed to have a husband that allows me to do that. But even though I should have enough time, I definitely have a hard time with, would have a hard time registering ahead of time and coming up with that, and that would add an extra barrier for me. And also, I have friends that I really care about in our community that are single moms, on top of having mental illness, like I do, and am medicated for. That also adds a barrier. I think adding more barriers is going to limit more people, and I think that is wrong. And instead, we should be carving out different ways. And it also feels very reactionary to what happened at the last board meeting with some of the members that were yelling and having a hard time and very heated. But from my perspective, and kind of a fresh perspective, I wish I was more educated on how everything works. It seems like people feel like they have to yell because they're not getting heard, but maybe grabbing more ways or carving out more ways for people to be heard would make it maybe calm down and not feel like they had to yell so much. That's what it seems like from my perspective is happening. That's it.
Thank you for sharing your comments. Good evening.
Good evening. Adam Campbell, C-section. So I just wanted to address some of the stuff that's being discussed. I think as far as the adjustment to the changes to public speaking, I think that's I think that you would be able to come up with a way to quorum or whatnot to prioritize residents and of Greendale. I think that it's good. I was here on the 25th. I saw what happened. It's kind of ironic. Well, I won't even get into that, but I just want to say that I think that it does have to be addressed to avoid what happened on the 25th from happening again, because that was completely out of line. And I've spoken to some of the board members personally, and it was really nice to get to meet you guys and discuss that. But I think that blocking parents in particular, or residents, taxpayers that live here, I don't think making it more difficult for them to speak or putting hurdles in the way is the best way to go. I also wanted to address the board regarding the safety plan. I oppose any safety plan that requires masking. Like has been said before me, if you want to mask your children, I think that's great. Go for it, you know, and making it mandatory, I think is, I don't think it's accomplished anything. Quarantining, I've heard parents talk about their kids being quarantined. My kids have been quarantined 3 times this year. 3 times, no sickness, no symptoms. The only message that has been sent to my children is that being present at school isn't that important. And if you're a parent, you know that it's already difficult enough oftentimes to get kids to take school as seriously as they should, let alone when every couple weeks or every few months they're told, well, you're just going to go home. And there really isn't a lot of direction, just so you guys know. There isn't a lot of support or direction. It's kind of like you're off. Okay, well, you're not sick, so do I lock my kid in his room? I think that'd be pretty ridiculous. I want to say that if I thought that there was a chance, okay, a substantial chance, that my kid going to school would possibly die or get severely ill, or cause another kid to die or be severely ill, I would not let him go to school, nor would any other parent. So this idea that people are scared or terrified, really they just, they're not being honest with themselves. If you want to lock down and stay home, I think that's great. I respect that decision. But business must continue. The show must go on. The idea that we can keep sending kids home, at that point, if that's the case, if that's what we're dealing with, and as long as I can remember, more people get sick when the weather gets bad. As long as I've been alive, as long as anybody's been alive. But if that's the case, then we just need to look at shutting down schools entirely, giving parents a waiver on their taxes, their property taxes, and let us pay out of pocket for what education we deem best. I mean, that's the alternative here. It's been 2 years. It's getting sillier and sillier. There's a new strain all the time, a new scare, a new threat. So I just want to come out. But I have enjoyed those of you that I've met and speaking to you. I think it's been great. I've really enjoyed meeting other parents in the community as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Christina Dimato. I live in the D section, and I'm a student from elementary high school in Mr. Nelson's 5th grade. And there's this kid who's quarantined, and he's doing all of this in-work stuff, and he can't do it because he's at home and he can't do it at all because he can't send Mr. Nelson can't send the papers to him, and we do all this stuff like for tests, and all he says to my friend when he's in quarantine, he said that you can't do it, and that kind of makes me feel sad because he can't do the work that he's doing and like doing tests and stuff, but he can't do it.
Thank you for sharing your comments. Nice job.
Merry Christmas and have a safe New Year.
Thank you. Any other comments this evening? All right, seeing none, we will continue. As I mentioned, several of the comments were related to the safety plan. We will be discussing that later on in tonight's agenda, and several other comments were also related to the school board policy that's being reviewed, and again, that will also be reviewed later on tonight's agenda. So continuing on, the student report. So Paris and Wes.
Hello. So to report, there's actually not a whole lot, just because not a lot has happened recently. I just want to touch on Student Council. Student Council, I was elected as vice president recently. I've appreciated the position. I've been working very closely with the president in terms of organization for the Student Council. Recently, we finished a food and toy drive. This has been annual within the Greendale High School for several years, so we wanted to continue it on. We've made several donations and successfully to St. Alphonsus within our community, as well as toys to the Salvation Army this holiday season. The Student Council has also recently completed a Spirit Week within collaboration with our extracurricular buddy club to bring holiday cheer before the break. And additional reminder for the seniors attending this high school, as well as their parents, the cap and gown forms are due at the end of the night. As well as one additional comment I would like to make, there was lots of public comments on quarantines, etc. I personally was quarantined 2 weeks ago. All my quarantine periods, negative test, never have contacted COVID. Ironically, when I came back, the people that sat at my desk that saw me absent were absent the week that I came back because they were exposed. One did have COVID, one's parents did have COVID, and they were both vaccinated. But other than that, nothing.
Right. Bess, anything from your perspective?
To press like that.
Is it?
So yeah, I haven't experienced any current quarantines yet, but I have experienced a decent amount of close contacts, and my brother, who is in the on lower grades, has been quarantined, and the quarantines are certainly hard on students, and in the recent few weeks, it definitely is visible that there are a larger amount of quarantines and close contacts among students, which I think is something to note.
Right. Thank you both very much, and congratulations, Paris, on your election as vice president. All right, then moving on with the agenda. Next item on the agenda is agenda item 1, the approval of the board meeting minutes from our last December meeting. Any discussion or questions? Otherwise, I'm looking for a motion to approve.
I'll move approval of the regular meeting minutes from December 6th as outlined in agenda item 1.1.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second to approve the regular board meeting minutes of December 6th, 2021. Any further discussion? And look for a roll call vote.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Noel?
Yes.
And I am yes, motion carries. Next item on the agenda, agenda item 2, the financial report. So Jonathan, anything that you'd like to highlight for this month's financial report?
We provided information through the month of November. The expenditures through the month of November were at 26.44% of budgeted. That compares with a slightly higher amount, 27.19% in the prior year. Revenues were at 8.18% of budgeted. That compares with 7.29% in the prior year. We know that our state aid numbers have climbed a bit in the last couple of years, so we get a larger percentage of state aid between in the first half of our financial year between July and December. And so we would expect to see that revenue number come in a little bit higher because a larger percentage is coming from that state aid. We'll get the first property tax payment in the month of January, and that's where we see that side of our revenues coming in. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
I wanted to clarify, the ESSER funding is not part of this revenue, is that correct?
The ESSER funding would be part of
It is.
the budgeted revenues for the year.
So
Yeah.
does that also explain why it's a little bit higher, or because we got more ESSER funding this year?
That would not explain why we're at a higher percentage received at this
Okay.
point in the year. It would be more so due to our large revenue sources that a larger percentage is coming from state aid, and that comes earlier in the year.
Okay.
I had a question too, Jonathan. I know we had our hearing on the 6th regarding the ESSER funds.
Yep.
At what point, because I wanted to advocate for the robotics club. So when does that decision need to be made?
Yep. So we committed in the last meeting that through the month of December, we were taking additional input regarding the budget. And so that's certainly one large ticket item that's been brought up and brought forward for student recovery. And so we're working on updating the budgeting. We're also pulling together information regarding HVAC univent replacement at Highland View, which was another large ticket item from the ESSER 3 funding. And we would plan to update the board at the January 10th meeting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So you're still collecting. So anyone out there that's listening, if they have any other suggestions on how to use the ESSER 3 funds, they should contact you or Kim.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Have we had any other groups that have approached us? I haven't heard of any. Or the
Well,
ESSER?
I don't believe so, but as Jonathan said, we're continuing to get feedback through the end of this month. Okay. All right, any other questions? Otherwise, I'm looking for a motion to approve this month's checks and disbursements.
Does Noelle want to do that remotely? She really likes to do
I think I hear her.
Yep.
Okay.
I motion to approve checks in the amount of $459,562.57 and disbursements in the amount of $3,475,819.80 for a total amount of $3,935,382.37 is outlined in agenda item 2.2. Please note the correction that in disbursements it shows 0.00 for the disbursements, and we made that correction in my motion to show that it's $3,475,819.80.
So specifically where it names the payroll summary, so we're just totaling up all the numbers that are listed for payroll, and that comes to the $3,475,819.80.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, there's been a motion and a second to approve a total amount to be approved of $3,935,382.37. Any further discussion? Can I call for a roll call vote?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Noel?
Yes.
And I am yes, motion carries. Then next item on the agenda is policies. So this is we brought back a first reading of the policies outlined in agenda item 3. We discussed it at our last board meeting. We were hoping to get some citizen feedback, and we heard some of that tonight, as well as receiving some from the community through emails. So any discussion on this?
So I don't know if we're okay with 110. I would like to discuss 187 and the rule. Could I share my input on that?
Yes, please.
Okay, and I did write out some notes. I've had an opportunity not only to listen to people during the citizen comments, but I have been asking the public as I've been out and about with my dogs, and just wanted to get their take on this whole citizen comments. I think, first of all, I'm just going to go through some points that I made. Also in response to one of the trustees actually wrote to us with her concerns. I feel that pre-registration actually seems too restrictive for our families. Not to mention, I think it will create a lot of extra work for our administrative assistant, Sue Patterson. I'm actually opposed to pre-meeting submission of citizen comments. I personally think better on my feet and speak from my heart when I share my comments during citizen comments at public meetings, and I think it's rare that I have a prepared statement like I do tonight. And I feel that others probably feel this way too. We heard from one citizen tonight, a mother that talked about how she's got many other responsibilities, and to try to think of a 4-hour window or before is challenging. Not to mention, as someone said before, that you may wish to make comments after hearing how the discussion of votes at the meeting actually go, which we obviously have a first and second portion of our meetings typically. So they should have the opportunity to share their reactions. In the case of the October 25th meeting, the majority of those who spoke and disrupted the meeting did not have any connection to our school district. As an elected official, I feel it is my job to listen to residents and other key stakeholders. That being said, I believe much more could have been done that night to intervene before the meeting actually got out of control. We don't restrict, some people are under the impression that we restrict citizen comments to the agenda items, but we do not do that at the school board. I agree that we should not punish Greendale residents for what was primarily out-of-district individuals who came to the meeting for the sole purpose of disrupting our meeting. I agree that pre-registration may inhibit individuals from being able to speak. As I mentioned before, I do not wish to see our administrative assistant taxed with the extra work of verifying names and addresses, and there could be complications with that, leading up to the meeting. I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. I think pre-registration creates barriers for citizens to speak. I've had a lot of time to think about and process the events that took place. I know a lot of work by our policy committee went into thinking out the details, and I respect that. I feel what is needed is that decorum is adhered to at our meetings, and I'd like to propose that in our president's statement at the beginning of our meetings that there be a comment about the types of behaviors that we experience. For instance, obscenities, threats, shouting, that those types of things are not going to be accepted at our meeting, and that should be said in the pre-statement. And if that does happen, then we have avenues to either recess as a board or ask for individuals to be removed or to leave the meeting. So this is where I stand at that one. So I will not be accepting the current proposed changes to the policy 187.
And I'd like to offer an opposing viewpoint. Surprise.
Did you write a statement too?
Surprise, yeah. A modification, actually. I want to start by quoting the American School Board Journal, December issue 2021, an article by Glenn Cook. Public discourse and communication with parents and community members are essential to board governance. However, the scenes at board meetings over the past several months show that the goal of many speakers is not to participate in reasoned debate. Instead, it is disruption, intimidation, and threats of violence, often for a social media audience. The individuals who are intent on causing chaos and disrupting our schools, many of whom are not even connected to local schools, are drowning out the voices of parents who must be heard when it comes to decisions about their children's education, health, and safety, says Chip Slavin, NSBA's intern executive and CEO. We need to get back to the work of meeting all students' needs and making sure that each student is prepared for a successful future. That's what school board members and parents care about. All right, and then since the revision of this policy was prompted by the 10/25/21 meeting, I have a short summary of that. On 10/25/21, people advocating for Greendale equity and Shanice for justice welcomed and protested alongside Badger Van Gray, the People's Revolution Milwaukee, Vaughn Mays of ComForce MKE. They were protesting the Greendale police for charging and arresting Milwaukee residents who were selling candy bars in Greendale without a permit, trespassing, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. Evidence of the Page and Chinese for Justice protest can be viewed on the Greendale School Board YouTube channel. Footage from the floor is also available on request. Despite the fact that the school board and the village board have hosted and documented dozens of diversity events in Greendale, Page and Chinese for Justice continue to complain, badger, harass, bully, threaten, videotape, lie to, and swear at the community they want to be welcomed in. I sincerely hope that Page leadership, Page members, and Page supporters will participate in a courageous conversation using restorative practices with the intention of making amends for the harm and trauma they caused in this peaceful and welcoming community. And then with that in mind, as far as the policy goes, even though school boards are not legally obligated to host public comments, the Greendale School Board unanimously agrees that public comments are important and welcomed. The current public comment policy was not enforced on 10/25/21, and even if it had been, it wouldn't have protected the Greendale School District stakeholders. Therefore, a revision of Policy 187 is necessary. The only way to ensure that parents, guardians, custodial parents, open enrollment parents, grandparents, Greendale School District students, residents, property owners, and Greendale staff have a turn at the public comment podium is to require pre-registration and verify that they belong to one of these stakeholder groups. Without pre-registration a vetting process, there's no way to guarantee that the public comment podium is reserved for Greendale School District stakeholders only. A pre-registration process also protects the privacy of the commenters by eliminating the need for them to state their name and address. Additionally, a pre-registration process will allow the school board president to remind all commenters that their comments are not immune from the legal consequences related to the content of their speech, and that there are standards of conduct expected at any board meeting, such as decorum, civility, and reasoned debate versus disorderly conduct. I can be persuaded at this time to waive my stance on public comments being submitted in advance, although doing so would allow the school board to read and reflect on comments that are more likely to be related to agenda items if they were submitted in advance. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I want to make sure that the full board any other additional comments. So, Noel, I know you're joining virtually, and
Yep. So I've had time to listen to community members, read the emails. At this point, the intent of what it was never any intent to quell the voice of the residents of Greendale. We have always had a very open comment section in our meetings here at the Board of Education, and that's been for lack of a better word, tradition in this community. And I think that tradition needs to continue. And I think that what we were trying to do, and I agree with Thor's comment from the last meeting, was we're trying to overcorrect for a situation back on October 25th. I'm not in favor of the policy as it was brought forth anymore, with the requirement of having comments brought forth 4 hours prior and a pre-registration. I think that the way we have it, it should be kept, and our citizens should be allowed to speak, and we should keep the comment section the way that it is at this time.
All right, thank you, Noel. Or anything?
My stance is still the same as last meeting. I'm not a fan of having the additional submissions ahead of time. I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that anyone who wants to come speak to us, in particular our primary stakeholders that we talked about, have that opportunity to do so and can do that freely. So if you're sitting here and you're moved to speak because of a comment that was made, or if you wanted to talk to us at the end of the meeting, you have those opportunities, just like you have the opportunity to email us or pick up the phone and call us at any time and voice your concerns or issues that you have with us. So, or not necessarily us, but generally.
Could I
Could be with us too, I suppose.
ask a question? Will this policy go back to the policy committee with suggestions? Because I did mention one suggestion that I would like to see in there, and I think it has to do with
Statement at the beginning?
the statement at the beginning. I think that should be part of our policy, that is mentioned at the beginning of the meeting so that people are aware.
I don't know if we have that statement in the policy. I'm comfortable with making changes to that statement that I typically read, so I'm comfortable just incorporating that.
Could we, as a board, discuss what it should say? There's some very specific language I think that it should say. Just, allowing the public to know that we do not accept threats or obscenities or disorderly conduct.
I would be in favor of that as well, but that begs the question: what happens when it's not being enforced? So what should we do? That should also be included. If we can't enforce our public comment policy, then we will, what are the consequences for people not being willing to follow our policy? So it sounds like we might need to go back, unless we're going to revise it right now on the spot.
Okay, so I guess I'm looking for, so that's for the whole board, what are the thoughts on that? Should we have the policy committee take a look at it and add some additional verbiage in there? Because it sounds as if what I'm hearing, and I'm in support of this, is that the overall policy will remain consistent with what we've done previously, where there's not a requirement to pre-register or submit comments. I think that's where the majority consensus is.
Well, I think we do have to take a vote, don't we? We have to take a vote, and then we can send it back to committee.
No, actually,
for revision.
First reading, we don't.
You're not posted to take action. You're
okay.
posted for discussion.
Yeah, when you look at the agenda, it's just here for information purposes.
Okay, I think it should go back to
In
committee.
the procedures, in the public participation procedures, one of the revisions is under item number 2 in the rule. No obscenities, no threats, and no harassing comments will be tolerated. So that has been added to the rule.
And it wasn't there previous.
Correct.
But still, what if someone does get up and start swearing and yelling? So, the policy should contain the consequence for someone not following the policy. Or for the policy, or the president, some other board member being able to take over if the president's not enforcing the policy. For the safety and the business, so that the business of the board can go forward.
It sounds like we're being very prescriptive to a single incident that happened.
Well,
I don't
one
know.
could argue that we did have a meeting prior to that in August that also got to that level. And I just see in there that it says obscenities, threats, harassing. I would like to have disorderly also included because there was disorderly conduct that day. And I just don't think that should be permissible. It's not part of our decorum.
Okay. What do other board members, so we've got some feedback there. What do other board members think?
I actually would like to make a comment on this. I think that adding added restrictions to public comment is just another barrier that people have to go through. So I think that adding this requirement of pre-submitting your script for what you're going to say and applying to speak is just simply an added barrier to a process which is already difficult enough. Like speaking in front of a large group of people, I definitely think is difficult sometimes, and doing it in front of people who might have varying opinions from you. And I just think that having to write that down might not allow people to speak what's truly on their mind. And I think that also, it was brought up that stakeholders would be allowed, but I think it might have also been mentioned that non-citizens wouldn't be able to talk. But I think that doing so would limit the ability of stakeholders to talk, such as teachers who live out of district. And I just think that adding more restrictions would certainly limit the amount of feedback you're able to be given on certain subjects. and I think that added restrictions should not be implemented.
All right. Thank you, Wes.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you sound like you were ready to make a comment.
I'm going to slightly agree with Wes and slightly disagree. I do believe certain regulations and restrictions should be in place to any policy in a board, in any other environment. I would like to make a proposal to revise the 4-hour limit, however, because I do feel like that is an extensive restriction towards the people that would like to speak, especially with the time frame. A lot of people work a 9-to-5 job, so by the time they get out of work, they no longer have that opportunity to submit something, and instead make it 2 hours before a meeting. I do think being prepared and having those comments prepared before the meeting starts allows more time within the board meeting to discuss other issues outside of public comments, although they are important and bring conversation within them. I also do believe that the rule about only people that are residents of Greendale should be outlawed, because if something such as October 25th were to happen again, or some incident that related to the Greendale community, maybe a Milwaukee resident, maybe a New Berlin resident, and something within Greendale affected them, they should have the right to speak about what happened within this community, so we are able to improve that incident and prevent it from happening again. And I did not know that the comments on the websites that previously allowed public comment have been blocked. My question is, was it blocked to limit the amount of online comments, excessive amount of comments, or comments that would be breaking the disorderly conduct restriction?
I think that was you were asking, that's in response to a public comment, and I think she was talking about the Greendale Health Department, and I don't think it was the school district, though. I thought it was the school district as well. Okay. So, Dr. Midzik, do you want to address that, or?
I can follow up with that. It's after the meeting with the public commenter.
Okay.
So if we get back to the policy that's being presented, let me, based on what I'm hearing, what if we propose to bring back the policy as written previously with the addition under the procedure, the comment that says no obscenities, no threats, no harassing comments, or disorderly conduct will be tolerated? If we brought that back as for a second reading at our next board meeting, could we vote on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine with me. I just don't, it's one thing to say you're not going to tolerate something, but then what's the consequence if that's broken? If the policy is broken in the midst, you know, obviously all of us hope, especially those of us who are here, that 1025 never gets repeated. But that's why policies get revised, is because things happen, and then you want to prevent that thing from happening again. So how would we prevent someone from breaking that part of our policy? What would be the consequence for someone who is disorderly and swearing and yelling?
I mean, to be specific, I would say they're given a warning, and if the behavior continues, that they would be asked to leave. And, you know, we have avenues if a person is refusing to leave and continuing to disrupt. You know, I don't want to say we want to tax our Greendale Police Department, but if it gets to that point, we have business to take care of. These meetings are about the business of the district. And clearly that day and a couple past incidences, it got to a point where the business was being interrupted.
So let me propose that if that continues, those people will no longer be recognized by the board chair, and without that recognition, any additional comments by that individual will stop.
I think you need to specify that if it continues, that they would be asked to leave.
Yeah,
I'm okay with that. Noel or Thor, any additional comments?
Yeah, and I think, I mean,
I think we also should somehow.
I want to make sure that everyone gets.
Yeah, I know, but somehow the residents, the stakeholders should be prioritized. over.
And I think we said that we weren't going to do that. So I just want to make sure that the whole board gets a chance to speak, so.
Yeah, I think on the policy, I'm fine with that being the way it is. The procedure, as you mentioned, adding in something that talks about what is or isn't appropriate. You think about the conduct of the meeting and what should be presented. I'm not opposed to that at all. We already have our preface that you give every single time, so I think just adding a couple words to that would get that point across. From a standpoint of what if, I think those scenarios, I know that you and Dr. Mizik met with Chief Rose now and put together a game plan for if something happens, kind of what we would do within that type of scenario. So, there's two rules of thought on that. One is, yes, it's good in our procedures to have certain things outlined and what would happen with that individual, but there's also the reality if the event isn't just an individual, if it's multiple individuals, and being able to, recess and move into a virtual environment, I think is something that we also kind of
another
continue to do that.
Yeah, and another obvious consequence would be the public comments would be cut off. They would just, if it's just, I'm just thinking of a classroom, you give someone a warning, and then if they don't abide by the warning, then there's a consequence. They either have to be escorted out or the activity has to stop, what they were engaging in, so.
Noelle, is there any feedback that you want to share or any comments that you'd like to share?
And I would say that I'm fine with the revision you're proposing, Joe. That we go with the policy as it was written previously, and then your proposal of adding I can't hear as well, but the language and the talking, the chair would, whatever
Disorderly
what you were
conduct
proposing,
language.
I would go along with. I would agree with, I should say.
All righty.
Disorderly conduct language?
We would add that into this, because I think right now the
Yes.
procedure has been updated to include obscenities, threats, harassing comments, and then to add disorderly
Yes.
conduct. Okay? All
And
right.
just on a side note, I know, Thor, you just mentioned that Dr. Midzik and Joe, you met with the
Yep.
police chief. It would be helpful for us as a board to have some follow-up as to that discussion, that anything that we might need to know in going forward, because I don't think we heard anything.
I think it may have been in one of the district updates, but if not, we can make sure that we clarify.
Okay.
That's a good point. All right, so I just want to make sure that we're clear, because I want to bring back a policy for a second reading that we can then take action on, so that we don't continue to review this, that we're actually taking action on it. So I think, Kim, can we make some additions to the procedure to account for those changes? And
Do you want to send it? You want to send it back to committee, or we will make
make the changes and bring it back to the next
revert to 187 as it was written before,
Yes.
with the adjustments in the rule around behavior expectations
Yes.
And consequences.
and consequences. Okay.
And I do want to just recognize again and thank the policy committee for initiating this. I mean, even though we're not going exactly with what you proposed, I think this was an important conversation for us to have. And I think it's important that the public is hearing this conversation as well.
All right, very good. All right, then continuing on under new business, next item is personnel. So we are here to make a motion to approve teacher resignations, replacement teachers, appointments. So any questions? Otherwise, I'm looking for a motion to approve.
I move to approve personnel as by accepting teacher resignations and approval of replacement teachers as outlined in agenda item 4.1.
I will second.
There's been a motion and a second to approve personnel. Any further discussion? Can I call for a roll call vote?
Yes.
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 Noel?
Yes.
And I am yes, motion carries. Continuing on under new business then is an update on the school safety report. So this is something that we heard several comments about it earlier tonight. This is a report that we've heard over the past 20 months now, and we've continued to make changes and revisions based on the environment in not only our school but in our community. So with that, Dr. Midzik and Jonathan Mitchell have brought back a school safety report based on current information.
Yes, I want to begin just by acknowledging that our parents are incredibly passionate about their children and their children's education, and they should be. I also appreciate that as a parent myself of a Greendale student, it is very difficult to parent in the current social environment. As a mom, I know that every day I consider how safe my daughter is at school, and I want to know that how she is learning and thriving at school. Social media and news media are constantly reminding me of all the things that could go wrong for my child. I'm deeply connected to the emotion and the impact of decisions in front of the board this evening, and I am doing my best to be thoughtful in providing information for decisions that will affect my child and others in the community. As a leader in our schools and community, I continue to work with the health department and participate on calls with Dr. Gutzeit and Dr. Kari at Children's Hospital. The data presented in the report online had our most accurate data as of Wednesday of last week when the report was compiled. Case counts have increased this week within the last 5 days, and during the report, Jonathan Mitchell will update the data in the presentation. In addition, I surveyed our staff for their perspective, and I will share that information with the report. Today, the Wisconsin Department of Health Services issued guidance on the Omicron variant. We will also share that information in the presentation. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Mitchell, who has been directly overseeing implementation of COVID safety protocols, particularly the test to stay pilot. So I'm going to turn over the presentation to him.
So thank you to Ryan for helping navigate the presentation. We've got updated data, so I'll identify some of that as we go through the slides, and then we'll make sure that we get all the updated information posted out for the community to review. If we go to the next slide. So we want to talk about mitigation strategies, our current data, talk about recommendations, and then have discussion about next steps based on board direction. And I also want to take some time to reflect on some of the comments that we heard this evening. So prior conversations, we've talked about mitigation steps, which include frequent hand washing, fresh air exchange, daily disinfecting, and antimicrobial products that have been applied to surfaces, hard surfaces throughout the district, and then close contact tracing. So current data, including case volumes. So here we have data as of December 15th, and I've noted a couple areas where we've updated data as of December 20th. One point I would want to make to the board this evening is that there is a lot of work that's going into trying to manage schools and keep kids in school through COVID. We have a full-time nurse, and we have one part-time nurse that we've hired this year. And when we talk about volumes of case data, in the earlier part of the year, we would manage about 50 students at a time. And that would include students that were symptomatic for COVID, close contacts, or had positive cases. And in recent weeks, with the jump of case data, that number has gone from 50 to it was over 310 at the end of last week. And as of this afternoon, it's at 287. So you can imagine from a customer service perspective, parents on an ongoing basis are sending phone calls, sending emails, and looking for assistance to try to get this cleared out. And our nursing staff, since the beginning of the pandemic, has tried to make sure, as late as it took every day, that they would answer every one of the phone calls, text messages, emails. And in the recent weeks, it has become such high volume that we've had challenges being able to complete that task. And our nursing staff takes a lot of pride, and so that was hard for them to do for as late as they were working, for all the weekends that they would work trying to do that, because we want to do everything we can to keep kids in school and get parents information that they need. But I wanted to be able to provide a sample of just the scale of what we're trying to do to help support our families.
Can you just clarify on there? It says 148 positive cases as of December 15th. So is that's Greendale?
That's school district positive cases that we've had reported at school.
Since the start of the school year.
Yep.
Since the
that we've
start of the
managed
school
it.
year. Okay.
Yep. These would all be since the start of the school year. So that's positive cases, and then close contacts. So we heard community members speaking about that close contact tracing process. So if we identify either masked within a 3-foot radius or unmasked within that 6-foot radius, those close contacts, then those are other cases that we have to manage. So if you have close contact tracing, you need to know what dates were the students in school and how does that match up with the student that was positive. Because it could be that that student was in close contact with 8 individuals, but it could be that there's 3 different days, or 2 different days of close contact, and some students were absent from school. So when we go to create letters to do close contact tracing, we need to make sure that we have different letters based on the attendance of those close contacts. And we work very hard to make sure that that data is accurate, so parents know when they can get tested and when they can get their students cleared to come back to school. And we heard some of the comments here this evening in terms of parents of, sometimes it's not timely that I get that information. And so operationally, to think about that, we usually have to go to teaching staff to get that information. We're going to get it sometime in the middle of the day from a parent to say, I've got a positive case. We're going to confirm that with the health department. We're going to figure out which day we have to go back to begin the contact tracing. Then we're going to have to work through the principal to try and get information from staff members within the building to figure out who those students are that are close contacts. Our staff members are going to be working with students during the day, so it's frequent that comes in at the end of the day. Then that information needs to be rechecked. We need to get dates updated onto letters, and then we need someone to help us with getting those letters and phone calls automated out to parents. And so it can happen that it takes several hours before we can complete that process, and it can go into that evening time. And we try to think about that in terms of what the timing is, because it's going to have all kinds of ramifications for parents on planning for work and what they're going to do in the coming days, and whether or not they might participate if we're going to offer them the Test to Stay program.
And this also entails the transportation for students that are on the buses as well. You're contact tracing them as well.
So we would be contact tracing in school, transportation, and any school district affiliated extracurriculars. So it could be I'm in this youth basketball, or I'm in the volleyball, I'm on the volleyball team. If it's school affiliated, we would also include that.
And are teachers being quarantined as well? When they come in contact with
So we would follow close contact tracing rules. So if we had a staff member that was in that 3 or 6 foot range, and then that staff member was unvaccinated.
Was not vaccinated.
Was not vaccinated. Yep. Any required quarantine is going to only be for individuals that are unvaccinated.
And that is for close contacts happening in a school setting. If there's a close contact in the household setting, yes, they're being quarantined.
So that's an additional layer every time that we go through this process. So as I was talking about, you've got this list of names. You're also going to need to crosswalk that list and find out which students are vaccinated and which aren't. And then those that are vaccinated get a different letter, get a different phone call than those that are unvaccinated. And that's a process we have to filter down the hierarchy of all those situations.
It is a process that we recommended and took on because we were seeking to keep kids in school, and this was a vehicle through which we could determine to maintain that safety. And so there are about 10 different paths on the flow chart, and so it does get very confusing for parents, which is why our nurses are trying to be responsive and make sure that people have the information that they need and they can explain it to them. But in the last several weeks, as Jonathan said, the customer service has declined just based on volume.
So Jonathan, I think if you can continue going through, and then,
Yep.
the thing that I think we want to discuss is there is a proposal, recommendation to make some changes. I think we want to understand and hear what the impetus for those changes are.
Sure.
Yeah, and this data, is this reflecting the Test to Stay program or just the general data?
This data, this would just be all case volume. It would encompass the Test to Stay. And so we updated the actively being managed cases, so it's 289 as the end of the day today, and on-site COVID tests 567. that would include all the test to stay tests. So we have a separate slide that'll just carve off that portion that are test to stay.
And how many, what's our total school district population? 2,000?
We're at about 2,700.
2,700, so 148 cases out of 2,700. What percentage is that? It's got to be pretty low.
That'd be roughly 5%.
5%? Okay.
Yep.
What you said, 2,700?
Yep, you can.
I want to do my own math.
Yep, sure. Ryan, if you could go to the next slide. So we put together some information to break down weekly case data from the beginning of October when there were some modifications made to the face covering protocols for K6, specifically at the 6th grade, making the modification to make that face coverings required. So here in the blue, we have the Greendale community data in total. In the red is our K6 data, and the yellow is our grade 7-12 data. And then we're looking at that as a percentage of weekly positive cases for each of those groupings for each week. So you can see that there's a spike in data as we get to the later part of October. And we see it most notably first in the K6 data, where you have a spike at the beginning of November. And you also see that data increase for the Greendale community, where we move from percentages that are about 0.25% per week to closer to about 0.4%. So there was a significant increase in case data. At the high school level, we actually see that number pretty stable at about 0.25%, and it actually goes down towards the last 3 weeks in November. For the conversation, I added an additional slide. Ryan, if you can flip to the next slide, that includes the first 2 weeks in December. So if we take a look at the very far right, here we see an increase in that blue, so reflecting the significant case level. So we've had cases of 88 and 86 for the Greendale community. We've got higher case levels, K6, that we see here that are similar percentages. And then the 7-12 level, we had about a 5-fold increase in weekly cases. And that may be a one-off. We've certainly had lower case levels at the 7-12 level, but that stands out in the data.
So the way I'm looking at this, Jonathan, is that when we look at the K6 level, where we have had a masking requirement, these two slides, the previous slide and this slide, indicate that we have had higher positivity rates at the K6 level despite our requirement to have masks for those students.
I'd be careful in saying that, though, because that is a population that we don't have the same data on as far as vaccination rates. So I don't think it's apples to apples. I don't know, Dr. Midzik, do you have any thoughts?
On the dates in question, there would be no vaccinated individuals on account of the fact that vaccine had not been approved on the 25th and the 1st.
Well, and to throw another layer in, K through 6 students normally are more sick than 6 through 12. So whether you were comparing flu or common cold or anything, you're probably going to have more K through 6 students sick than 6 through 12.
And Jonathan, you kind of touched upon this most recent weekending for our secondary level, 7 through 12. Any indication as to what caused that spike, or was that a group of students or a family of students or anything that we know at this point, or is that something that?
I mean, what
percentage? So do you know case?
I can't speak to that, why that data is what it is. I can speak to the district nurse reported that we were over 10 cases again in that group today. So that number is going to be close to that 1.25%. It's moving in that direction just on Monday's positive case counts. And out of those cases, we had about 90% of them were at that grade 7-12 level.
We've got 2 7 through 12th graders right here. Maybe they could comment on why their age group. No. I want to go back to your statistic, Jonathan, on 148 overall, over 4 months, roughly, right? September, October, November, December. And so if you're just looking at it from strictly mathematically, if you divide 4 months into 148 cases, that's 37 a month, district-wide. And then that really lowers the percentage down to 1% each month that we're actually experiencing any positive COVID, tests or symptoms. And I know that it's not, it's not 100%. You could have had 50 1 month and 20, for the next month. But just from a mathematical standpoint, does that sound right? Mathematically speaking?
So I would say about that data is that was midweek as of last week, and what we've been seeing is positive case counts that are ranging from 5 to 10 or more per day that we're receiving right now. So the volume of what we're seeing is going up significantly. So that number 148, I didn't update it for the slide here tonight, is going to change on a daily basis.
In the webinar that Dr. Midzik sent us a link to this afternoon from the DHS is showing that there is a spike at this point. That was very clearly made during that particular presentation, that we're seeing a spike right now.
And I'll throw in again, but we're probably also seeing a spike in the common cold and the flu and all kinds of other respiratory RSV.
I don't want to convolute the conversation. The common cold is not the coronavirus.
No, but we, as one of our public commenters said, in December we see a spike in a lot of diseases here in Wisconsin.
Yeah. So if we focus on the coronavirus, this is good information, and like you said, Kathy, there is a trend upward since the middle part of November. That is evidenced in what we're showing here.
I do have a question about that, because before he put the other slide, this slide up, the previous slide, it showed that grades 7 through 12 were declining in cases, and then they had a rapid spike in December. Is this proposed because grades 7 through 12 are optional for masking and the younger grades are not, as well as how effective has the Test to Stay program been considering these statistics in the last few months?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Yeah.
I think that's covered in the next slides.
So let's go to the next slides, and then let's talk a little bit further about those questions. So if we go one further, so just getting an idea on current case counts. So Wisconsin weekly cases over 25,000, Milwaukee County about 3,000, and then Greendale cases, we had 88 in the prior week and then 86 this last week, and we're at a 13.2% positivity rate. So these are some of the highest numbers that we've seen in the last year.
No, that's the community though, right? Not the school district?
Greendale means the village. Yes, thank
Right.
you for clarifying that.
Okay.
In the village. So local data. Yes, it would be beyond the K-12, and it would be the whole village. So 13.2% positivity rate of tests, and these are higher numbers than what we've seen in the last year. If we go to the next slide, I think one of our community members mentioned this, and one of the community members said 97% of ICU beds are filled. And so some of the data that we see here in the lighter purple, so the top part of the chart, you see an escalation in total hospitalized patients. And so that's been climbing since the middle part of July. And that up until now has been connected to the wave of Delta that we've had throughout the state. These are statewide numbers, and this is posted through Journal Sentinel online. And that has been climbing. The darker purple numbers are ICU beds, or patients that are in the ICU, and those numbers are similar to what they were at the peak in November, December of 2020. So this is a concerning chart that in October we saw what was the start of a decline, and then it's kind of been straight up since that period of time.
Another additional question.
Yeah.
As the data shows Thanksgiving, obviously a time for celebration for many families and getting together with relatives. It doesn't surprise me, but that there's a peak there. However, we are just going into another break in the next few days. How is the district prepared for the break or the result of the break after, just based on the Thanksgiving rate?
So Paris is the question, how will we respond if we see increased cases? Yeah, I think that's when we get to our recommendations, I think that's some of the push-pull that we have in this. How do we maximize what we're doing to protect staff and students with those things that are evidence-based? Because the numbers as they creep up can start to become overwhelming for our team to keep up with on a daily basis. So some of the conversation is, how do we prioritize what's most important to respond to with this? So if we go to the next slide, we wanted to bring forward, because this came out after the board packet was issued, and there's been updates regarding the Omicron variant over the weekend, but this came specifically from the Department of Health Services. That says there's a serious risk that continued increased numbers of COVID-19 cases will overwhelm an already strained healthcare system, leading to dangerous situations where patients experiencing medical emergencies may not be able to receive immediate, adequate, life-saving attention and care due to lack of hospital capacity. So that was part of the advisory statement. And if we go to the next slide, to slow the spread of the Omicron variant, DHS is urging all Wisconsinites to take the following actions immediately. One is getting vaccinated against COVID-19, including a booster dose as soon as you are eligible. 2, wearing a well-fitting mask in indoor spaces when others are present who do not live with you. And 3, celebrating safely over the holidays by keeping gatherings small, getting tested before visiting others, and staying home if you have any symptoms. So we wanted to
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but obviously DHS didn't mention that one of the reasons the hospital systems are so overwhelmed is because so many hospital employees who did not want to get vaccinated left their profession. So the same thing's happening in other businesses that are requiring the vaccine. So I know Omicron, I'm not denying that Omicron is here and spreading, but another reason our systems are overloaded is because there's less employees. There's less customer service because there's less people there. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Make sure we're thinking about all angles.
Thanks. If we go to the next slide, information on the Test to Stay. So the Test to Stay pilot was intended to speed up the opportunity for students to come back to school. It was an optional program. It was being piloted in collaboration with the Greendale Health Department, and it also had review from the Department of Health Services. They reviewed the terms of what we were proposing before we did it, and they advised us to go ahead with the pilot program. And so we began that on November 8th, and this was data through the 16th, and I've got an additional slide to get the most updated data. But through the 16th, we were at 154 total eligible and 59 total participating. So this means that during close contact tracing, where there was a quarantine, that we contacted 154 student parents and said, you are now eligible for the Test to Stay program. Here are the parameters. And per the prior board discussion, parents had options in terms of going out to get an outside test, but mainly what we anticipated was they would come on site in the morning to be tested between our 7:30 a.m. to 8:15 a.m. window to have a rapid antigen test completed, and that once that was done, students could be released to go back to school. There were certain parameters. Students needed to wear a mask during that 7-day period after they got tested. The test obviously needed to come back negative. There was a symptom screener that needed to be completed, and parents needed to sign a waiver acknowledging that this was a pilot program and it was optional for them to attend. Additionally, they had to sign up for tests through the state COVID Connect system. So you go on your smartphone or your computer on home and go through a question screener to register each time that you complete a test. And the terms of this were students would have the option to test the very next day that they were quarantined, that very next morning, and then every other day of that first 7-day quarantine period.
Were there any students that were denied that wanted to participate but were denied access to the program?
Denied access. So when you say that, what are you thinking?
We just got several, I shouldn't say several, we got a handful of emails about people who said that
Yes.
there was.
So when we had students who were notified on day 5 after contact, the next day would be day 6, and they sought clarification because it wasn't every other day to test to stay. And when they sought clarification from the health department, they said there needed to be 2 data points. So we did have we had a couple of cases in which students were told that they could test on day 6 or 7 to return on day 8. And once I became aware of that, we had some conversations again with the health department, and we then have been allowing students to test immediately. So there was one period, but they would not be listed as total eligible because they were not considered eligible in that moment. Now they are.
So those were some learnings during this pilot period.
Those were some learnings during the pilot period of something where we had designed a program, and when we hit the, oh shoot, what do we do? Because this isn't how we designed it. And we sought counsel from our partners in designing the program. They gave us some information, but when we really dug in the next day or two after realizing that we had students missing school, we returned to the intent of the program and changed our practice with future day 5 notifications.
Sure. So, I mean, because most people thought if I'm a close contact,
that's what we all thought, and we sought clarification.
I'm negative.
Yep.
I can stay in school.
We sought clarification and had to debate that and changed it.
Can you clarify what the secondary cases are? So you list there positive tests, and then you list number of secondary cases. What are secondary cases?
So a big concern with running a test to stay program is that you're allowing students to come back into school during their 7-day quarantine period. So if you later find out that a student was in school during that quarantine period and was positive, and then was able to spread, and there were additional cases from that classroom, it may be a little bit difficult to determine that they're connected, but we were trying to track and monitor if a student that was part of Test to Stay later became positive during their 14 days after contact, and there were cases from those classrooms, they would be labeled a secondary case. And so that's a big risk, and so the health department and Department of Health Services wants to know anything that would come in that fashion immediately. We had one positive case that's come up in the 6 weeks that we've been running the pilot, and we did not have any secondary cases from that.
And I just think that's so remarkable because remember, I actually spoke against the test to stay because we already had data that showed that our quarantines were not leading to positive COVID tests. And now we have more data that shows that the close contacts were not contracting COVID-19. So that's really important, I think, to keep in mind as we're discussing the revision of this plan.
Yep, so I know there's interest at the state level to get this data because we were one of 2 school districts that started a pilot at a similar time period. There's other schools that are exploring that at this point, but since we were working through models from other states or other countries, we certainly have worked to clarify questions as we've gone through the pilot. So here in the data, 38% would be total eligible that are participating and total days of quarantine avoided. So here we're talking about if a student was completing a 10-day quarantine versus that ability to come back to Test to Stay. It does include weekend days, but that would represent days that can be avoided by getting them back to school right away. We talked about positive tests Negative tests, we can obviously have more than one test per student. I think the maximum any student has taken is 3, but it is possible that a student could be in the test to stay program, complete multiple tests, and at the end of their quarantine period become a close contact to a new case that would extend their close contact period, and they would go through another round of test to stay. And so that's something that that's come up, and we've learned through that program. Parents, again, have the option of continuing to go through that program if those dates, that date of completing 7 days after close contact is extended due to the new exposure.
Just for the sake of discussion too, can you recap the definition of close contact that you are using? So what is a close contact?
So close contact, it would be within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more in a 24-hour period if students were unmasked, and would be 3 foot for students that would be masked.
Wow.
So we have a 38% participation rate, so that's 62% did not participate in this.
Yep.
What type of data do we have on, or if any, do we have on those who did not participate and cases of COVID and so forth? Because I know it's something that you can get access to, correct?
So data on why families chose not to.
No, whether they became COVID positive.
Just, whether there were actual COVID positive, because, I mean, that's a pretty big percentage that didn't test that we don't have data on.
Well, they quarantined, though, right? They went home.
Right, I think the question is, so those that stayed home quarantining, was the positivity rate higher than what we're showing here?
Yeah.
Because, and Jonathan, I think you've got another slide that brings us up to week ending 12/20.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and go to that slide?
We jumped from 38% to 46%, so it is higher. From my perspective, this is good news, that we aren't seeing a high positivity rate. Those that are close contact.
It also defies the whole logic of you're supposed to get COVID from close contact. If someone has COVID, I'm supposed to pick it up from you because I've had close contact with you. But our data is showing that it's not happening with the students in our district.
Yeah, I think the other thing is there are some other mitigation strategies that are going on with HVAC, with some of the cleaning that's happening, some of the vaccination rates that we're seeing amongst our community, amongst our secondary students.
Hand washing.
So there are. We continue to follow those mitigation strategies. When you go down that list, the question then we'll get to is this test to stay, is this quarantine process a
help or hindrance?
I wouldn't say it's a hindrance, but does it?
Well, it's taxing. I mean, on the system, it's taxing.
Right. Is this where we want to spend our time? Is there is the return on this?
Worth the investment.
And Kim, it's safe to say, because I've heard from several families that have had these quarantines, if they're choosing not to test to stay, then that's when they have to quarantine. But I think Mary maybe asked this already, but they haven't been turned away from it if they do the test to stay.
There was a period at the end of November, beginning of December, where that happened in a couple of cases, but that has not happened since we clarified that.
Okay. And I think the other thing that's important is if the student has a family member within their household that is tested positive, this information doesn't apply, correct?
Correct. They also would not be listed in the total eligible.
So they're more likely to get COVID at home than at school.
Yeah,
from someone who's positive, who is a COVID positive.
I don't know if you have a slide on this, Jonathan, but in the community at large, they're showing 80% chance of getting COVID if you have a household case. And in our staff, we've had a 42% rate of COVID transmission in a household among our vaccinated staff.
So that data we find significant. So if we're saying that if there's a positive case at home, you may be somewhere in the range of 40% to 80% of the time someone else in the home is going to become positive, and that will cross over that data with individuals that are vaccinated, that's impactful. What we've seen through the Test to Stay pilot is that the positivity rate is 0.5%. We got some feedback that the positivity rate maybe should be based off of total participants, because if you're taking multiple tests, if you get a positive case, it should really be out of the total participants. That would move that number closer to 1%. And that's within the tolerance of what we expected when we did the research on this. From others that have done the Test to Stay pilots, they saw case rates of 1 to 3% of transmission.
To go off of Mr. Capito's point in terms of if the Test to Stay is something that the district would be moving forward with or not, would an alternative be that no contact tracing is being recorded, and therefore we won't have data on who's contacted to who based on the overwhelming amount of times this has happened? Sorry, but also with once we have that data of the close contact, most of those people that are close contacted have not contracted COVID.
I think Dr. Minzik was proposing that they would still notify close contacts, but not necessarily, quarantine them or offer the Test to Stay program. Am I understanding
And
that?
I know we're getting ahead of ourselves. Yeah, there's two.
Okay.
There's one more slide, and then we'll get to those recommendations. So, any other questions about the Test to Stay pilot? All right, Jonathan, if you want to continue.
So another piece of information that we wanted to gather was information regarding 5 to 11 vaccinations. So total vaccines, this was as of the date last week that this information was provided, 526 vaccines, 355 first doses, 165 second doses. The total 5 to 11 population, we're at right at about 1,200. So that would mean that 29.5% had at least one dose, and 13.7% were fully vaccinated. We did a series of 4 clinics within the school district, and we had the second dose clinic of those 4 here earlier this evening, and we had about 90, I think it was about 90 vaccinations. Okay, so based on, those that had signed up and then came, some may have found alternate means to get that vaccination completed, but we had another 60 that completed vaccinations this evening, and that was mainly the second dose. So we know that that number will go up as that second dose is completed. But this data first became available last week, and we understand that there may be some delay based on individual doctors' offices or pharmacies that are processing these. As they're getting that data into the state, then it becomes available for the health department to pull to give us updated rates.
And are we able to offer vaccination clinics in partnership with our health department in January after the holiday season?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions about the current vaccination rates? So I think the next slide, Jonathan, is the recommendations.
Yep. So I think some of the things for consideration is that we are seeing low levels of positive cases that are coming through contact tracing and through the Test to Stay program. And I would underline that it is a heavy usage of resources. It's administrative staff, it's principals, it's teachers, it's our nursing staff. I've been directly involved with making sure that we're running the Test to Stay program, and we're open to the direction that the board provides, but it's a significant amount of time every day to be able to manage those cases. And certainly we want to be reflective of the level of a positive case rate that we're getting from the data. We feel really good that we participated in the Test to Stay pilot, and again, open to the feedback of what we do next. But we believe that that data matches up with what we saw previously. And we've now seen a higher level of testing so that we can support what we had previously been seeing through contact tracing. We just had a low number of families that were reporting tests that they were completing while on quarantine. So now we have a larger pool of data. So that those two items are connected together. If we're going to continue to do the Test to Stay program, we have to be reflective of what we may face with the Omicron variant, and that may be justification to continue on. We've increased every day recently. We had 30 cars that were in line to do the Test to Stay program. Some of them half an hour early for the program here this morning, and we're trying to move that through as quick as possible, because the longer it takes, it means students are being pulled from educational programming. And so we've worked as hard as we can to make that efficient, and we know if there's a long line that's frustrating for families. And so we've discussed, some of the alternatives to deal with the spikes, but it takes time. So it took over an hour this morning to be able to complete 32 tests to get those students cleared and get them back to school. So then the third item is based on the data. We know it's significant, the data difference between those students that are in close contact versus those that have a positive case at home. And so when we're hearing data that's anywhere from 40% to 80% of the time, there's another positive case from spread at home. We want to make sure that we're focusing and prioritizing time to support what the health department is doing in follow-up of quarantine. So if mom and dad have a positive case and that gets reported, and then there are students within the household and we get notified because those students are going to be out of school for a period of time, we want to make sure that we're available to follow up and support families. I will say that has been a challenge given the amount of contact tracing and running the Test to Stay pilot that we've done, that we've had difficulty juggling all those things at the same time when we're anywhere between 250 to 300 students that we're managing on a daily basis. And
sorry, I actually have a question about number 3. Yeah. Does that include vaccinated students as well in the household who have to quarantine if there's like a case within the family?
At this time, the Greendale Health Department has not included vaccinated students in that quarantine process. They are saying that vaccinated students should mask until a negative test 5 to 7 days after last close contact, but continue masking otherwise. And they've also recommended that vaccinated students in the household monitor for symptoms. So if they become symptomatic, then they should stay home.
Is that something that the school is monitoring, if a vaccinated student is supposed to be masked?
We have not provided, we have not enforced the masking of students. We have advised the families, and the health department has advised the families, and we have supported that.
I have heard that the numbers of students at the middle school and high school that are masking has gone up, though. Is that correct?
All the information I have on that is personal observation. I didn't do counts, but there was an increased number of students masked at the middle and high school today.
Would you guys go the same?
Yes, I would agree. I think also more people are masking just because of the common cold and germs spreading in that sense. I do have not a question, but a comment. I know there was public comment about the teaching staff and their experience with students in quarantine. If number 1 was implemented in terms of letting families choose a quarantine for students, I do believe that number would decrease because more students would like to be at school. However, I also believe that there will be students that will continue to choose to quarantine, and that's just something that the teachers, I think, will just have to endure throughout the pandemic, that there will be some students at home and there will be a majority more at school. From experience, online learning has been difficult as I've done it various times throughout the last few months, and some of the classes depending on what they are easier to do asynchronous assignments. So a teacher gives you an assignment and you can do it on your own time, whereas other classes, such as my biology class, may ask to do a lab, and that can come with conflicts because if you're not able to do the lab online, then you have to wait until you come back to school. So,
thank you, Paris, for bringing that up, because I wanted to echo what we heard in that public comment as well, that's actually called concurrent teaching, where you've got students in front of you, and then you have students in a Google Meet, and you're trying to address both needs at once, and it's nearly impossible. So I don't know how you get around it unless you have a separate virtual lane, which I know we can't afford, but it is very, very difficult to concurrently teach. Both groups of students end up suffering. So I would wholeheartedly agree with the public comment that we heard from the 6th grade teacher at the middle school.
So I guess to clarify, number one, if we're talking about modifying that quarantine, we'd identify students in all classrooms for that student and give families a blanket notification to let them know that they may have been a close contact, and to notify them to contact the school if they would like to isolate their student, that we would medically excuse them. We would also alternatively or concurrently provide the ability for testing through our district testing center that we have. So just to clarify what that potentially could look like.
We met with the health department last week, Tuesday, and had discussions about this, and all of these recommendations can be supported. They want to continue to recommend and advise quarantine of close contacts, and the following information should be included when we inform families that their child was a close contact in a classroom setting. First, to monitor for symptoms. Second, to mask, to wear a mask at that point once you have become once you're identified as a close contact, that they could test, and that the quarantine recommendation from public health is the period that is there, 7 days, 10 days, whatever is the guidance from the health department at that point. So when we would notify families of close contact in a classroom setting, we would continue to provide all the information on what's recommended from public health. The significant change would be that we would not be monitoring compliance of the health department recommendation. And so that would be the change that would be happening.
And these are actually revised from your originally published recommendations, correct?
Yeah, some of the language here. Mm-hmm. These are the recommendations, but based on feedback that we got, I added additional clarifying information. So like for number one, we would talk about the potential of that when we return from break. When we talk about number four, a couple things. One, we heard from community members about students under the age of 5, so families do not have the ability to access vaccines. So we would be open to modifying what that looks like and providing specific masking requirements for programming that would be age 4 and younger to accommodate that at the sites where we would have that programming. We also intended for that timeline to be different than number one. And we understand that there's growing data regarding the Omicron variant, and that the board may want additional time to be able to review the caseload that we are getting at the K6 level. In particular, the board may want to review what the DHS is recommending in terms of universal masking indoors, and if that was something that the board provided direction that the district go to universal masking in response to the Omicron variant, we would be open to discussing the logistics of that as well. But right now, we have a 7-12 masking policy that was provided by the board, and K6, that 5-year-old to 11-year-old age band at that time was dependent on having access to the vaccine. And so we're looking for direction on how we merge both of those systems together. When we have questions about particular events, right now we have to navigate which grouping that's in. So we can have events in the same space, like when we have holiday concerts, but for some, masks are not required And for some, they are based on those age groupings.
So I would just like to make a point. Would you mind going back to the case trend, which included December?
If Mr. Jonas can help us.
I think, yeah, the graph.
Go back a couple more.
I think it's a couple. I'm sorry. The ones
The
with
712.
Yeah, that one.
Yep, thank you.
So I actually talked about this with a decent amount of students, and I talked to them about the possibility of implementing a removal of quarantine of non-vaccinated close contacted students. And of those students, I got a varying level of responses, but the general consensus among the students, at least, was that this might be a bit like in haste, especially given the context of the spread of the Omicron variant. And at least from my point of view, I feel like removing mitigations, especially as we can see a trend, at least where cases are starting to rise among students, and especially now that the Omicron variant is becoming more prevalent and it is more contagious, I feel like at least removing mitigations at this point might not be in the best interest, just because of the increased amount of cases we might be seeing among students.
Thank you, Wes.
I would echo that, Wes. I think that's one of the hardest considerations I've had in all of this is, we're looking at a trend going up right now. We're also looking at the holiday period, and that people are going to be at all kinds of gatherings and so forth. And I do know my own mother actually got COVID, and she's vaccinated and had her booster. We've canceled our Christmas gathering because of people now with the trend going up in the family and so forth. So I would echo what you're saying with that. The timing that we're looking at right now to do this decision right after the break does concern me.
Can we go back to the last slide, the recommendation slide? Because I thought some of the changes take effect at the end of January.
Yeah, the number 4.
Number 4 does, but the one we're talking about with the quarantine.
Contact tracing is.
Contact tracing. I think that's what you were referring to, Wes. But I would even venture to say that the 31st right now, I would prefer as a board member to make that decision after the holidays for number 4 for certain. Just because I think that we're going into an unknown territory right now, and I feel it's a gamble. I feel like in some senses is reckless for us to go against what not only the CDC but the DHS, our health department recommendations. So I look at that as even being too soon to make that decision right now.
And just a clarification, because I think the health department, you have reviewed this with the health department.
Mm-hmm.
They said that, I don't want to put words in the mouth, but they were supportive of what you've outlined here.
The two things that they said is that we continue to inform close contacts and that we provide them with the information and the recommendations from the health department. Again, the change is that we would not be monitoring compliance with the health department. And then the second thing was that they wanted to make sure part of the January 31st was that allowed families time to complete vaccination if they were choosing to vaccinate at their pediatrician's office. The health department was receiving comments from community members who wanted to get their children vaccinated, but they were uncomfortable with, for whatever reason, in the larger mass vaccination clinics and wanted to schedule that appointment with their pediatrician's office. And many pediatricians' offices were scheduling into January. And so while they wanted to vaccinate and they wanted that protection, they didn't have access because they were choosing to do so in their doctor's office. And so that's why they said, yep, if you're going to set it out at a date and you're not going to make it vaccination dependent, then or percent dependent, then they would recommend to go to the end of January.
Yeah, and I mean, the Greendale Health Department reports to the Greendale Village Board.
Correct.
They're really just an advisory to the Greendale School District. And parents and legal guardians have the legal right to waive any vaccine for health, religious, or personal conviction reasons. So I think we need to, my proposal is actually remarkably similar to what you, I didn't see your revised proposal, Kim and Jonathan, until just now. I was operating off of the original board packet, but I propose that we return all health decisions for minor children who are on loan to the Greendale School District for 8 hours a day to their parents and legal guardians. I propose allowing parents and legal guardians to assume all responsibility and liability for the decisions they make for their children. I propose that we trust the Greendale School District parents to make decisions about whether their child is symptomatic and healthy enough to attend school, or whether or not they should be masked during the school day, just like they do when their child is not in school. I propose that we revise, I have this prepared statement, I'm just going to read it. I propose that we revise and simplify the COVID safety plan in the following ways. Number one, discontinue the test to stay program and all close contact quarantines effective immediately. If students are symptomatic at school, teachers can send the students to the nurse's office, and the nurse can consult with a parent to determine whether the student should stay in school or not. This simple screening process has worked in school buildings for decades. Secondly, the Greendale School District COVID dashboard should be updated daily and easy to locate. A link to the Greendale Health Department COVID dashboard should be easy to access as well, allowing parents and legal guardians to decide if they want to mask or quarantine their children on any given school day. If there is a positive COVID case in the household, health department quarantines should be applied. Number three, if the COVID cases reach a certain threshold, this was brought up by a public commenter today, and I think we should consider it. If the COVID cases reach a certain threshold, 3 to 4% of staff and students in any Greendale School District building, then and only then will masks be mandated and or virtual school offered for 10 school days in the building that has an outbreak, just like we used to do when there were other communicable diseases and outbreaks. Number four, I propose that we continue to enforce effective hand washing, I love that word, effective hand washing, sanitizing, and proper ventilation forevermore. I propose, and lastly, I propose that this parent responsibility liability COVID safety plan go into effect on January 18th, a little earlier than you said, than you're proposing, Kim, and be revised at the end of January, revisited at the end of January. Thanks, that's it. Yeah, I'm done. I'm finally done, yeah.
Okay, so we've heard from a couple of different board members. Kathy, anything? I couldn't tell if you wanted to say anything.
No,
Okay.
And Mary, I do understand what you're saying as far as giving the decision over to the parents. I definitely am not trying to make decisions for parents. However, we do need to also understand that the decisions that are being made by others are affecting others. So I think, this is a pandemic. This is not something that we've dealt with in our lifetime yet. So this is different, in my opinion, than some of the past ways that we've approached these types of things. So
Yeah, except we've been dealing with it for almost 2 years now.
And that's the hard part. And in the meeting I was in today, or listening to the webinar and talking to Dr. Kari and Dr. Goodside, people are getting fed up. It is definitely taxing on everyone. But at the same extent, they're saying we need to stay. And we do need to take these mitigation strategies to help us move forward and out of this. So, I again defer a lot of my decision making. I have heard, and I have so many friends on both sides of this issue, and listened to many residents here tonight. I just, in my opinion, I have to defer to the medical professionals, because I am not a medical professional, and this is the advice that's being given. So that's where I'm at right now.
Right. All right. And then the others on the board, where are they at?
So one piece of information which I think was really profound, and obviously it was great to hear from all different sides and from everyone across the board. There's a lot of really powerful statements that people made. There's a lot of interesting facts and data that people were sharing on all different areas. But to see that 551 quarantine days were diverted through a test-to-stay program with one positive case, right? So that's showcasing that ultimately those students would have missed 551 days potentially of school. That's not acceptable. I mean, we talked about that on day one when we were coming through this, is how do we keep kids in school and what can we do to make sure that they have those opportunities to be in school so that they can learn best. So that part I think is important. When we talked about extending, when we changed our plan to a plan that we're currently on, the rationale behind that when we sat and talked with the health department was to ensure that we had vaccines available for our students before we unmasked. To me, I think it does make sense to wait till the end of January based upon comments that you made and also even just comments that we had to deal with trying to get access to vaccines and setting up appointments and all that kind of stuff. It takes a little bit longer than some might assume. So I think that's good to give that opportunity and make sure that people who want to have that opportunity to vaccinate their children have the ability to do that. There was also some commentary around preschool students and what do you do with preschool students. I think if that was our plan all along, was to make sure that we had opportunities for vaccinations before we lifted that. Why not stay the course on that course for preschool students? It sounds like that is coming. So if parents do want to have access in the next quarter, they potentially will once that gets approved by FDA. So in my mind, I'm not opposed to the plan that's in front of us. I guess the one question I have is just from that timing perspective, what does that look like if, from a difference standpoint for the district to do number one here versus what we're doing currently, and what does that look like, I guess? Could you walk me through the process of still doing the advisories, but not necessarily policing it, I guess, if you will?
We could do a role play. I'll call in with a COVID positive case.
So,
you tell me what you'd say, Jonathan.
Mary, I'm going to remind you that it's 9:30, and we still have a couple of items on the agenda.
So if we had Ms. Grogan call in and say, I have a student that had a positive case, again, we would get documentation, or we would go to the health department to confirm that positive case. So before we're working on it, we know that that's a valid, completed positive. It's not like somebody did a antigen test at home that's going to need additional validation that we would move forward. So then at that point, we would notify the school building of that student, the dates of close contact, and the school building would need to pull a roster of those students that were in classes. So at the K-5 level, it's going to be your homeroom class. When you get to the upper grade levels, it's going to need to be that roster that's going to include all of those students' classes, and then send out a template revised letter. So what would have been our quarantine letter in the past will now be that quarantine advisory letter to families that would say you have your student may have been in close contact to a positive case and you have these options as a parent. One, we continue to provide testing on site. So if you choose to access that, it would provide information on how to contact the district to sign up for testing on site. Two, it'd provide direction on if you were going to keep the student at home because they may have been a close contact, to notify the school. And then for attendance reasons, we would not penalize the student. That would be a medically excused absence. And so it would provide that direction. It would also provide information about following up with the district nursing team.
There's still a fair amount of work that would be required. The outcome would look very differently.
Correct. And that's where I was trying to understand. So it sounds like in this scenario, the building principal and
there's two modifications that would make it less cumbersome. One is we won't be in the classroom measuring distance between desks. And so it will be sent to all parents in the classroom that there was a positive case in your child's classroom, and they may have been within. So that's one thing. So that cuts down on the teachers having to provide information on where students sat, how close those desks were, et cetera. The second part of that is once those students are informed, we're not keeping a running list of did they test today, check, did they test today, check, did they test today, check. Well, if that person's in school, they didn't test, we got to call the mom and tell them. So that after follow-up to enforce that quarantine would be, that time-consuming labor would be not be happening.
Does that answer your questions? I mean, I think.
Yeah, I was just trying. So it comes out of the nurse's office and goes into the school, the individual schools.
It's a notification.
As a notification.
Yeah, I mean, it's a notification, and then the parents can decide, how do I want to react to this?
And so the likelihood is that parents will get more letters in this new scenario, likely, right? Because you're going to get it for everyone in the classroom versus just those that were close. So they'll have to take that in consideration, and obviously you can't share who that person was for HIPAA reasons. So I'm just trying to think through how does that impact, parents' decisions and what they're doing, not doing, and then ultimately the notice will say, if you're symptomatic or if you have issues, maintain, stay home.
Right now, if the student would be in the classroom but not identified as close contact, the only thing the parent's going to see is a school-wide letter that says, hey, we had a case in school. On multiple occasions, we've had contacts from parents saying, this doesn't really provide a lot of value to me to just let me know that there was a case in school, because it's obviously not targeted. Now, once it's targeted down to the classroom level, that's going to be more actionable if I'm a parent with heightened alert saying, if my student's in class with a positive case, I'm going to take X, Y, Z mitigation steps for my family in response to that. And so we would modify to do that.
Okay.
And then it eliminates the quarantines. Because the close contact quarantines we're seeing are not
I was just trying to think
yielding positive
parents,
cases.
right? So the parents are going to get this note, and so then the hope would be that they would follow the guidance that we've had all along, which would be, take a temperature. If they have any symptoms, don't send them to school, right? But it could also lead to people saying, well, I'm going to keep my kid home because we saw this uptick or whatever else. So I'm just trying to think through what the all different opportunities would be.
They would continue to, and if they chose to keep their child home during the duration of the quarantine, that would be a medically excused absence, and we would provide the instructional support as we have done.
Okay. And I just think that, in general, as we have across, the last 2 years, I think keeping a pulse on this is going to be important just to make sure, we're not accidentally increasing our I don't think that'll be the case, but all of a sudden, more kids are quarantining when they don't need to be, or something of that nature, because they're worried about the letter.
They could add, a number 5 that says, if there's 3% of cases there's 3% of the staff and students at Canterbury are currently all positive with COVID, then that's a little bit. Oh, there's a lot of people in this one building. Then if that data is,
kind of a fail-safe
comes true, then you can say, okay, we're going to wear masks for 10 school days at Canterbury because there's quite a few cases here. Yeah. Or virtual. Some schools have said, well, we're going to go virtual for 2 weeks while there's a heightened number of. I don't know if Greendale ever get to that because of you have low numbers and you have we have low numbers here, and the other mitigation, and I think we have parents that generally keep their kids home when they're sick. Most parents in this school district don't say, oh, I know you don't feel well, but just go to school anyway.
That does happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll argue that.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that we hear from the whole board. Noelle, I know you're joining us virtually. Is there anything that you'd like to share at this point?
Well, I find it ironic that right now we're discussing shutting down mitigation strategies as we go into the Omicron variant, and I'm finding it difficult. I'm hearing the parents. I hear them tonight. I read their emails, and I'm hearing what Jonathan is saying about the stress and tax that it's putting in, resources that it's putting on our schools and taking away from the academic time, which isn't what we want. But I'm also concerned about how we would mitigate in cases like what we're going to go through. I mean, is this, you know, I'm kind of in Kathleen's line of maybe we need to look at this in January as opposed to looking at this right now, because right now we're going into the holidays where people are going to be out, and then we come back and we have at least 2 weeks of people who are, you know, been exposed to different people, and you have kids. And I just, you know, if you look at the bigger picture, you look at how this affects teachers, how this affects, I think about the reading buddies. You know, if we decide not to do masks at the elementary level, and we will at some point, but at the level of vaccine that they're at right now, you have a lot of elderly people who are doing this reading buddy program. We don't have enough now. If that goes away, that program could go away because we don't have enough people, because they won't come in. And you have other programs. You look at Park and Rec. They have all these other programs that go on. You have youth basketball, you have dance, you have all these other things where we're involved with Greenfield and other communities. So now you have other more cross-pollination. When we look at this, we need to look at the bigger picture.
Thanks, Noel.
And how it affects other people, because it isn't just about, it does affect other people. I mean, we had an email from a teacher that talked about himself getting COVID from a student who come back after having COVID, and he wasn't wearing a mask, and the teacher who was double masked got COVID. And then he brought it home to his family. So there's this give and take, and we have to figure that out. I'm liking some of what I'm hearing, but I think we're talking about it at an odd time. Yep. And I think January would be a better time to speak about it and give Kim and the team some better opportunity to give them more feedback and be able to have more data, if you want to put it that way, to say, okay, now we're back. Maybe there'll be more kids vaccinated at that point, and we can talk about it.
And I'd like to push back a little bit and say we're coming off the Thanksgiving holiday, and we already have some experience as far as what a holiday's going to look with COVID. People are vaccinated.
Yes, and Mary, I'd give you a personal example of that, where I know where there were, I won't say they're students of Greendale, but they were people there were at least 12 people that went to a local establishment, and 6 of them got COVID, and a couple of them have been vaccinated.
Yeah, and I mean, we could obviously debate COVID itself till the cows come home, but people are vaccinated, they're boosted, many have developed natural immunity, and we still haven't arrived at this magical herd immunity that we were looking for. Where's herd immunity? It's not coming.
We should just get rid of everything.
I'm not proposing get rid of everything, Noel. The data that we're being presented with shows that the students are not getting COVID from their close contacts here at school. They are getting them from household cases, but not from close contacts at
school.
Yeah, so I just want to get us back to this. So I think, I want to make sure everyone has, everyone's voice is heard. I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to share what they think is working, where they see gaps, and what the timing of it is. I appreciate, Kim, that you and Jonathan have come back. As a board, we have revisited this topic over the past, year and a half, almost 2 years now. So I think that has been positive. We have updated our policies, our processes to reflect where we are currently at. I think you're right. I think this information that you shared is very, very good information. So I appreciate that you coming back. The recommendations that you're putting up here today look a little different than what we probably would have discussed a couple of weeks ago. So I think that shows a genuine concern for the health and safety of our students, the general concern for the health and safety of our staff, but also an aspiration that we want to get back to a point in time where students are in the classroom, students are healthy, we're not dealing with this. You know, we do have to deal with this. We do have a number of mitigation strategies that we already have in place. Those are not going to go away. I am comfortable with the recommendation that you have outlined in here. I'm comfortable with the time frame. I think a couple of things that I would like to see is addressing the pre-K or the K4 and the early elementary students. What do we call it? Early education?
childhood.
Thank you, early childhood. I think we want to address that group of students where that continues to be masking, because I think, Thor, what I heard you say is consistent with what our practice has been in the past. If there is not a vaccination available, we want to take masking requirements, because that is probably the best mitigation strategy we have at that time.
Could we also poll those parents, because they're not currently masking?
Yes, they are.
They are? Oh, they are. The 3 and 4 year olds are? Oh, okay.
Because they're part of the K-5.
Oh, okay, okay. All right.
So that I would recommend that we continue to follow that until and if a time it becomes available where vaccines are available for those at that age group. And I hear some concerns about, you know, are we acting too hastily? I like the idea that I think has been brought up before, is perhaps in January we have a trigger that says, okay, should we hit this point, this is the action that we'll be taking, so that if after the holiday season, after the first of the new year, we hit some type of positivity rate, and I'll let administration, I think administration is probably in the best position to identify what that threshold is. We will then go to a masking requirement, and to hit another gate, we'll go to an all-virtual school. And I think that's what I heard you say.
Yeah, yeah.
So a couple
For
of
10 days, 10 school days.
So a couple of things. First, I want to say that we're not saying that things don't work. What we're saying is, based on the data, this layer of protection might not be where we want to invest our time and energy. And so we'll invest it in the places where we're seeing the greatest level of spread, close contact quarantines in household settings. Then in response to that guardrail in which we set a percentage, the majority of districts who have that set have set a 3% case count in a 7-day period in a single building. At some of our schools, that would be 11 students. At some of our schools, that would be 30 students. It just depends. But that at that 3%, some districts had made it automatic, and that became difficult. And some districts have said at 3%, we authorize administration to take action to implement face coverings and transition to virtual based on the circumstances. Because if you have 2 families with lots of kids, and that makes up 3% of the school, that's really 2 household spreads rather than an outbreak within the school setting. And so by setting that 3% and then allowing for administration to then make some temporary changes, they set a timeline on that, 7 days, 10 days, administration can make a change until it goes below 3% or for 7, 10 days after the 3% is reached. So
that sounds reasonable.
I think that's something that the board would have to take action on for that. I don't think that's something that we would make up a number without your approval.
Can you
Sure.
come back to the board with recommendations, like similarly to what you did here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
So we're not obviously posted to take action.
You are posted to take action on the safety plan, and you can choose to take action in whatever way someone motions and seconds.
So I know we've had a really good conversation, and we've kind of run the gamut, but I think that there is maybe consensus isn't the right word, but maybe a majority that are comfortable with these recommendations, provided that we account for the early education and the 4K, and that we also ask administration to come back with kind of a guardrails or stopgap measures in January that would.
I'll just say again that I'm not comfortable at this point in time, and I want to go on the record and say that I think we're doing this a little presumptuous. I think we should be making this decision in January, but that's where I'm at right now.
Well, and I'll motion to accept the recommendations as written with a few amendments. We're going to address the early childhood students, ages 3 and 4, and we're going to get some recommendations from Dr. Midzik and her administrative team regarding some guardrails with regards to the number of cases per, that might be in any particular building. And when we're looking at numbers, we should be looking at staff and students, positive cases in staff and students. And I obviously would like to see that January 31st date moved up a little bit. I'm not sure if the rest of the board will agree with me, so I'll just leave my motion with that.
I apologize because I did not share data because it was not in the slides on the staff feedback.
Oh yeah, you were going to say.
So if you want that information, I can provide that.
Yeah.
I don't know
We've
if
got
that's
a motion.
Yeah, motion.
Yep.
Need a second? Any
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, there's been a motion, a second, to approve the recommendations as outlined in agenda item 4.2 with the amended recommendations to account for 3- and 4-year-olds at our schools, as well as to ask administration to present another recommendation at our next board meeting regarding guardrails, where we would have an administration take action to mitigate potentially schools that have higher cases.
And with the motion on the floor, you can discuss if
any further discussion. So I know we had a lot of good discussion. Some of the board members have shared where they're at. Any other discussion?
So with this proposed motion, can it be set? Because I do think we're going to be looking at positivity rates. Are we talking about a percentage at this time, or is that going to be something that we have to look at our next meeting?
I think what we've asked the administration to put together a recommendation that says then at our next meeting in January.
Do some research on what other local school districts are doing. I do want to clarify and make sure, Kim, that it's close. So we're switching gears instead of focusing so much on the close contacts and measuring
in a school setting, close contacts in a family setting.
Close contacts in an unvaccinated household. Is that correct? Isn't that what I thought I read in the Green Bill?
Unvaccinated would be required to quarantine. Vaccinated would be provided with the same information. The quarantine for household close contacts would remain the same.
So number
as
3.
It is currently.
Okay, whether the household is vaccinated or not.
Well, sometimes some members of the household.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah, all right.
So it would remain.
Fair enough.
It would remain the same and consistent with health department recommendations.
Okay.
So as it says right there, continue to follow Greendale Health Department quarantine.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to
For
clarify.
unvaccinated students.
Would anyone like the staff feedback?
Sure, I'm interested. I'm always interested to hear what the staff has to say.
Absolutely, yes.
So they were asked 3 questions. One was, do you support transitioning to the masking protocol for K-6 to masks recommended? 58% said no, and 38% said yes, with 3% unsure. And at the modifying quarantine practices for close contacts in a school setting, 49% said no, 33% said yes, and 18% said I'm not sure.
Interesting. It kind of reflects what we've...
And what type of numbers, responses were you looking at?
136 responses, and it was limited to 1 per person.
And how many staff total are you...
136 staff responses out of 280.
280, okay.
I just have a couple clarifying questions. So for number 1, would this be saying that families would still be contacted if their student was a close contact? However, the family would make the decision on whether that student should be quarantined. And then as well as if there's a positive case of COVID within that household, those that are close contacts will have to remain in quarantine because there's a positive case. And then for the second protocol, if this recommendation would be approved later in January, the test to stay program would be eliminated from the district.
Test to stay would be eliminated, surveillance testing would not. So the testing would still be accessible, but it wouldn't be a gatekeeper to keep kids from returning to school.
But your first two questions, did you get those answered? You have so many questions.
So
in a row.
let's start one at a time.
I do.
I think the first one was about the...
Yes, if this recommendation for number 1 is implemented, students will still be informed if they're close contacts. Yes. However, it's their family's decision whether they want to quarantine.
Yes.
Unless there's a positive case within the household, then that close contact would have to quarantine automatically.
I don't think the close contact, if the close contact is in the household, they have to quarantine.
So they would be informed and provided with the same recommendations for quarantining that we have now, but we will not police their compliance.
Right. So the other question regarding close contacts in the classroom, it would be modified. So instead of measuring and limiting the communication with families to just those that are measured within those distances, the 3 or 6 foot distance, it would be every family that's within that classroom would get that notification.
And the school-wide notification's still going out? There'll be 2 separate notifications, or
I'm not
just to the classroom?
Not sure there's a school-wide notification.
There have been, right? There have been school-wide, right?
There have been school-wide notifications. So that's part of the piece that we'll need to review is we're trying to make those communications more relevant.
More targeted.
So if they're targeted to that whole classroom, that seems more appropriate from the feedback that we've gotten from families, that they're being fully notified. If you're telling me everyone that's within that classroom, that there's been a case. If I'm notified that there was a case in a high school of 900 plus students, that doesn't necessarily give me actionable information.
Options.
So I think there we need to, if approved, we would need to pivot so that we're really getting to targeted.
I want to ask one more question about the notifications. So in a classroom, if there were more than one case, then would 2 separate letters go out? You know, would a letter for each case go out, or would one letter with there were 3 cases?
If there were 2 or more cases in the same classroom, there's specific language from the health department that they would include in the notification letter.
Okay.
Right. Any other questions?
So I just want to add, we made a motion before we took the staff input into account. Should we?
We still have a motion, so that
this motion has to be voted on.
That teacher's staff input provided clarification. So we do discuss, once the motion was made and seconded, we do have a conversation. So I think the teacher.
You have to take action on the motion on the floor, and if the motion does not pass, you can take a new motion.
You can amend the motion if you want.
Well, I think I don't.
A friendly amendment.
I mean, I do.
You can certainly add any comments or questions.
Well, I do want to add that we did not take the staff input into account before the motion was made, and so if we're going to vote on that, I think we need to take that into account first.
And we have not voted on it, so you're correct. That, let's take into account the staff. Is there any more?
Yeah, and I'm not gonna amend my motion, but I do appreciate having the input from the staff. If anyone else wants to amend the motion, they can.
Can you just refresh, Kim, when you said 58% no, 38% yes, 3% unsure, what was that specific to?
Changing the masking recommendations at the K-6 level.
Okay. And then the other one was to modify
quarantine practices for schools, close contacts in a school setting. That was 48% no, 33% yes, and 19%.
48,
I'm
not
sure.
49.
Correct.
And it was 100. How many
maybe
people took it?
People are at home right now taking the survey.
They're all jumping on.
There's a couple new ones in.
So it was 106. Did you say originally?
136.
136. It's up to 140.
Oh, okay. They're all.
So let's get those coming in.
Yeah.
All right. Any other discussion?
So less
I'm going to
than
call.
half.
Otherwise, I'm going to call for a roll call vote. All right, seeing none, I'm going to call for a roll call vote.
I'm voting yes.
No.
Yes.
Noel, are you on the phone?
No.
And I am yes, motion carries. Thank you, everyone. I think this is a conversation that we've had with the community, for the past 20 months, and it never gets any easier, but I think it's a thoughtful process, and I appreciate the work, Jonathan and Kim, that you guys put together to really get into some of the details here.
So we will have this topic on our first agenda for the new year, correct?
We will not be voting on the recommendations that we just approved with the modification to the 3- and 4-year-olds. So that was part of this action item. What we will be voting on in January is those, I keep calling them guardrails, that say if the cases hit X, we will ask administration to develop a plan to address that school's thing. So that last piece is the only thing that's still outstanding. Is that how you understand it, Kim?
That's my understanding, that on January 10th, I will bring back a percentage that provides administration with the latitude to make modifications to masking and virtual.
Okay. All right, thank you again, everyone. Continuing on, for under new business, so we're going to hear a couple of reports, including the first item under 5.1, the compensation benchmarking report for support staff.
So this is a report that we look at every other year. This year's support staff review, and sharing some information and comparable data to other districts in CISA 1. I used a similar format to when I presented on this 2 years ago. And in looking at the average salaries for general education paraprofessionals in Greendale, we have very few regular ed paraprofessionals. Most of our paraprofessionals are special education, but for the few that we do have, the average starting salary in CISA 1 in this region is at $15 an hour, up to a high-end range of just under $18 an hour. The comparable that I have here is looking at the red line is the median wages, so using that same information, the median wage, and then the yellow line indicates Greendale's wages. So with this, you can see that we are a little bit higher than the CISA 1 average in this area. Special education, you see a different trend line here. So same data that we're sharing, the starting salary up to the high end range. And what we see here is that Greendale is comparable with our starting salary, but then with our more experienced paraprofessionals and those that we are retaining, that we are not as competitive in the region. So that is something that we can look at and should probably address as we move forward. Next one we look at is elementary secretary wages. Similar trend here, that we are competitive with others in the region and slightly above what the starting and the high-end salaries are for elementary secretaries. Next one is lead custodian, and I will say that I'm not very sure about the accuracy of the data in comparisons across districts for custodians, because the way that districts classify custodians, who gets lumped into a custodial position, looks different across districts, and so it's not as much of an apples to apples comparison as you might see in the other comparables. That being said, it does appear that our starting salary for our custodial positions is low compared to the region. And then at the top end, we are exceeding the region. So that is one of the areas that I'd like to dig into a little bit further to look at our starting salaries. We have recently had some retirements and shifts within our custodial staff, and we've had a difficult time filling those positions. It could be related to our starting salary. It also could be related to the labor market and our struggles to fill a lot of positions right now. So just need to get some more information and data on that, but it's possible that our starting salary for custodians may be too low comparably. This is just a different way of looking at the similar data, breaking it out a little bit differently. So I have more information specific around starting salary, what that average is, what the median is, and then Greendale's starting. So my color coding there indicates that we are on par for our general ed para and elementary secretaries. Our special education para I highlighted in yellow, because in looking at the districts that are immediately surrounding Greendale, so Franklin, Whitnall, Greenfield, New Berlin, those districts have starting wages of $16.69 to $18.14. We are currently at 16. So when I look at those immediately surrounding districts, we do seem to be somewhat low in comparison to the others. And that's something that we need to continue to monitor. And so that's a very difficult to fill position. And we have some openings and vacancies that we've been unable to staff at this point. So continuing to address that.
I don't know if you can answer now or not, but we recently have lost some special ed paras. Do we know, is it due to salaries?
That information is coming on the next slide, okay. So I'll get to that in just a minute. So, and then at the high end ranges, that is somewhere where we look to be falling somewhat short. I believe that that's tied directly to the elimination of the salary structures. Since Act 10 came into place, we have done CPI increases for our staff in these classifications in these job categories, and that hasn't kept up with some of the other districts. So that is something that we will need to look at and continue to address.
Julie, it is when I was looking at the top ends versus the the starting salaries, obviously it's based on an average number of districts, but is our tenure the same as those districts, or is their tenure longer on average than our districts in those top end salaries?
That's a good question, and I don't have an answer to it. So this data is reported. This is not part of the data that the state collects. This is a local regional survey data, and we don't collect years of experience. So that is something that I can dig into further and get more information about. This is a hot topic in many districts right now, and lots of districts are looking at this. I participated in a wage study for another district, and they're going to share the results of the outcome of that. And so we'll be getting more information probably within the next month to provide us additional support and data for this.
Yeah, it was just kind of alarming. I mean, not alarming, but just to see that, we started off kind of okay, and then all of a sudden,
I think it is somewhat tied to salary structures, and some of the districts that I've looked at as comparisons do have salary structures in place, and so they're providing longevity bumps and increases to their staff, and we have not done that for 10, 11 years. And so I think we're starting to see some of the effects of that. So good news that I'm excited about, and this ties directly into Kathy's question regarding the retention of our paraprofessionals. We are shifting our model and our offer of insurance to paraprofessionals. When I gave you this report last time, I told you that that was a sticking point and a problem area for us. So Jonathan and I have worked the numbers and looked at how we would be able to better retain staff in this job classification. So effective 1/1, we are shifting the premium contribution that our paraprofessional staff make towards their insurance. Previously, it's been based on full-time, full-year employment, so they essentially were paying about 50% of the cost of the premium, which on a family plan is nearly $2,000 a month total premium. They were paying about $1,000 a month. So with this shift, we're moving to a 90% district paid, 10% premium share for the employee for a single plan, and a 70-30 split on a family plan. So it is my hope that that adjustment will help to retain the staff in this and make this a much more affordable benefit for them.
And they're already aware of this?
Yes. So we are working on the communication with staff and getting that out. I've had some individual conversations with people that are directly affected by it, that were in the process of possibly looking for a different job, and so we have been sharing the information, but there will be additional communication coming out to all staff about it.
Good.
Yep. I thought that it was helpful. This kind of gets into the tenure of our specific staff and where that's at. So you can see the percentage breakout of their experience. I think it is telling and interesting to see that we have 27% of our paraprofessionals that have been in place for more than 10 years, and some of them upwards of 20 plus years. So that's a significant number, but we also have seen more turnover and more fluctuation there as well. We compare the number of paraprofessionals that we have in place. So we talked about last time that I brought this report forward that we have seen a significant increase in the number of paraprofessionals. Specifically, and like I said before, most of our paraprofessionals are special education paraprofessionals supporting our students with special needs. We have seen an increase in that, and it's something that Rachel and I have been working and developing some formulas and ways to look at that, valuing the role of caseloads and how teachers support staff, how we can balance that between paraprofessionals and teachers, and who's providing the support to the students and how that's being provided. So that is something that we are continuing to monitor and be attentive to.
How does I don't want to get into lengthy discussion about it, but how does the funding work for the special ed paras? Does it come out of special ed then, or like how does that work? Because part of my legislative update is about potentially more funding coming for special ed.
So yes, for the special education paraprofessionals, that is tied to the categorical special education aid. And I don't know if you're looking for more detail than that, I'd turn it over to John.
Salaries for the special ed paraprofessionals are part of fund
27.
27. Yeah. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I don't want to go into a lengthy discussion about it right now, but I just, I'm hopeful at the state and national level that we will have more leverage there going forward. So
I think some of it is the support that's required for students, specifically to medical needs and the significance of needs. And sometimes there's a need for a one-to-one paraprofessional working with a student, or sometimes it's a 1-2, 1-3. And so just finding that right balance of how we support the student needs and the instructional needs as well.
And sometimes that paraprofessional for the special education paraprofessional looks more like a certified nursing assistant because of the student's needs.
Depending on the needs, and we've posted in different ways because of the medical needs of some of our students. So it really just depends on the needs of the specific student, and how we can best support them.
So, okay.
On the bottom points of this slide, when you say go to teach at Greendale, those are the folks that came into the regular education teaching roles, or?
They're actually in special education.
Special education.
Roles, and that was part of the Department of Workforce Development grant that we had paraprofessionals that obtained their teaching certification.
And then the same question for the last bullet, did they go into?
A little bit of a mix of both. I think most of them were special ed also. Of the 5, I know at least 3 of them for sure were special education. I'd have to check the other 2.
Okay.
So as much as it felt like it was a lot, when I looked at the data and broke it out of what they were leaving for and why they were leaving, the 5 that left to pursue opportunities outside of education, that mostly was tied to benefits and that they needed full-time work in a full-time environment with full-time benefit eligibility.
And to their credit, it's a very difficult job, so I think it's great that you guys both of you have found some ways to make it sustainable for them. So I think that's really great.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly do value the work that they're doing, and it's important to retain them. And so the wage piece is a part of it, but that benefits piece is also very important.
It's a 90% district, 10% them.
For a single plan, that's correct, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Julie. Any other questions? All right, continuing on, we've got Ryan here to talk a little about our technology infrastructure and integration report. This is an annual report, or I think biannual?
It's an annual report.
Okay, thanks.
So first, an update on a project that I've been talking about for quite some time is our redundant connection to the internet. Most of the programming that we do with technology does require the internet. So when we lose it, it does have a big impact on learning. And so I'm happy to report that the equipment we've been waiting for was actually installed today. And the connection is being brought up online as we speak. So that will give us some additional insurance in case there is a fiber break or the season that we all fear is construction season, when backhoes go into the ground and rip up all sorts of things. So that is getting some traction. And again, to remind you, we are active in a group called We Can, and this is a logical map that covers everything from Waukesha to New Berlin to Muskego to Franklin, and we are that little tiny part, but reap the benefits of connecting to a much larger network to provide some shared services and redundancy.
Is that like a fiber optic line?
It's a lot of them, yes.
And can the residents tap into it, or is it just for the school districts?
It's government entities and school districts. Yep. Another thing that we focus on quite a bit is our support workflows, and so this is something that we revisit quite often as situations change, to see how we can best support all of our constituents. So we do have a ticketing system, much like the maintenance department does. Just pulling the numbers on that system, we've resolved 1,775 tickets from July through the end of November. And a few things that we do to help people, even before it gets to the ticket process, is we set up a self-help webpage. So a lot of things can be resolved from the same set of did you turn it off and turn it back on, for an example, or did you what we call power wash our Chromebooks, which is an odd thing to say, but it's a tactic. And so we put all those on that self-help webpage with the hopes that many of those issues can get resolved by the people themselves and ultimately get students back to the learning process as quick as possible.
Do students fill out their own help tickets, or do the staff do that for them?
So it is open for students technically, but most of the tickets are filled out by staff and by parents. We do have help desks in the buildings, and at the elementaries, the offices are used to a large extent. And a lot of things are troubleshooted right at the desk. We do have spare devices in each of the buildings, so what we try to do is, if we can't fix it within a minute or so, we don't want the students sitting there and waiting. We'll give you a spare device.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Three notable updates over this past year. Something called DAC cables were installed on our network switches, which is exciting because it speeds up the connections to the student at the end of the day. So we have our network is a bit more rigid. We've upgraded second grade devices. They were previously on iPads. They are now on touchscreen Chromebooks. So that aligns with second through 12th grade students. And then implementation of Infinite Campus, which really touches every aspect of what we do here in the schools, which was previously covered by PowerSchool. So that's been quite the undertaking, but we are happy to be live with that system.
So are you guys, is Greendale using that for attendance, grading, everything, right? You're not having multiple...
All of the above. So we went live July 27th and had a few days to configure online registration, and we jumped right into that. And Infinite Campus is much more capable of doing more things than PowerSchool ever was, and it's one of the reasons we moved to it. And one of the challenges has been, well, now Infinite Campus can do this. Do we want to utilize it for that? Well, yes, we do. Okay, well then here's all the questions we need to answer to implement that. So it's been a pretty constant process, but it's definitely beneficial to us.
In particular, special education, I'm assuming that there was a little learning curve switching from PowerSchool, or was it, how easy was that switch over? Because I know that's pretty labor intensive.
So special ed uses a system called OASIS, and it is something that we are looking to move to Infinite Campus, but we said that with all the changes going on, we'll take this year to do that change. And so I know Rachel is working.
Yep, I can speak to that a little bit, Ryan. Sorry, I need to tune up my voice here. So we'll be working with a small team over second semester to develop a conversion plan. So our goal would be to start, number one, have some training with our small team, Number 2, train all of our special education staff, and then start to write those IEPs, 504s, and then the plans for our private schools and Infinite Campus, with the goal being that we're starting that conversion process and getting it completed by the end of this school year. So we still need to develop this plan a little bit and roll it out to staff, but we've started those conversations with our Infinite Campus consultant.
I did do some work with Oasis. This is Marty, right, from Franklin? Is that the Oasis you're talking about? So I know he personalized things that he did for special ed. Are you finding that Infinite Campus is going to be smooth for you as well, or will they let you have input?
I think that it will be a pretty smooth process. I know that I have personally used Infinite Campus in a previous district. We also have another program support teacher that has utilized it. So we're pretty excited about what Infinite Campus can do. Obviously, I came in late this year, so we need to work through that conversion plan, roll it out to staff. But based on the conversations I've had with the consultants, I think that we'll be able to develop a pretty smooth process for our staff this year.
Okay.
Right, thanks, Rachel. So Ryan, you're going to highlight the long-range capital plan then?
Yep, thank you, Rachel. So I continue to work with Jonathan on long-range capital expenditures, aligning that with funding sources, so things like servers, switches. Our wireless system is a big thing that we're looking to target this upcoming summer. Phone system and student and staff devices being another item. And then on the horizon, things that we're working on, a fiber build to connect the CLC with the middle school. 2 benefits here. One is it connects the Park and Recreation Department, which is currently putting up with some pretty slow service speeds, and it builds future capacity for the village to connect in with our network as well down the road. And then, as I alluded to, the wireless system, there's a new standard that was just released, and we want to make sure that we tap into that, which makes things quite a bit faster. This Wi-Fi 6E, you'll probably hear quite a bit about. It's the biggest update to Wi-Fi since it was released in 1989. So we are excited to put that into the schools.
It's called 6E?
6E.
It's faster than 5G?
Much faster, yes. And with that, I'd take any questions you might have.
Well, I just want to mention that I hear you on the radio, Ryan.
I do too.
Yeah, I just want you to know that I'm grateful that you're out there advertising for the Greendale School District.
It's quite odd hearing myself on the drive-in.
And what is the product again? It's like it's some systems or something.
No, he doesn't give free plugs.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't give what? Yeah. Autographs. No.
Ryan, I'm just going to compliment you, not only as a former 5th grade student of mine, but as just an amazing amount of work you've done in the time you've been here. And I know you're working with our village. Mary just kind of alluded to one of the things that they're going to also be expanding. I think you've just done some wonderful things to get Greendale kind of up to grade here. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Continuing on with the agenda, next item on the agenda is the Welcoming Diversity Update. So again, this is something that we've heard updates from over the past 2 years or so. And again, this is kind of where we are at today, what brought, some of the history and what we've accomplished as well.
So the last time that you heard a report on welcoming diversity, the Welcoming Diversity Action Plan was in April of this year. April, yes. And at that time, we were going into our strategic planning process and seeking community input on what the next 3 to 5 years look like for our community. And we collected a lot of community input on that. There was a period of time in which the Welcoming Diversity Action Plan did not meet, but many of the participants in that were included in the strategic planning process. In July, members of the steering team came together again the Welcoming Diversity Action Plan came together again. We had started with an original 12 members to that Welcoming Diversity Action Plan steering group, and we had 6 remaining members at that time. And now we have 5 members of that team. So when we came together to have conversations, one of the questions was, how are we going to advance the work? Is it still representative of the community vision around that? And so the the 5 remaining members talked about that structure. There was not universal agreement on the next steps, but the majority of the group had some recommendations, and that is what is presented in the report. So there is a number of actions that have been taken by the group to support the original Welcoming Diversity action steps that were listed. Some of those are listed there. You have adopted a new policy around equity. You have had a number of programs available for the community and for our students. And there have been some programs sponsored and supported by the Welcoming Diversity teams, specifically the MLK contest and some of the other community learning events for parents and the community as a whole. So that funding, last year there was less funding used than in the previous school year. Last school year there was $8,000 that was approved for funding specifically on the segregation in the hidden impact of segregation in Greendale and the greater Milwaukee area. That event was online in November of 2019. It says October of 2019, so I could have my dates off. There was a student assembly. There was 2 Art and Solidarity, and then a consultant to do some leadership coaching. The last expense from the Welcoming Diversity Action Plan allocation in Fund 80 was in January of 2021. So that those funds have not been accessed since January of 2021, and we spent $8,000 of $25,000 allocation in the 2021 school year.
Kim, what was the expenditure, or what were the expenditures the first year?
During the 1920 school year, there were several expenditures. We spent, I believe, $22,000, but I don't have Jonathan here to look it up specifically. It was for the community convening event, was one of the major expenses, and then a number of programs in the community, as well as some flags that were purchased by the village, and some, that did not come out of the $22,000 for the district. That came out of the village's money. So there were a number of expenses in the 1920 school year. So approximately $22,000 in the 1920 school year, approximately $8,000 in the 2021 school year.
Would it be safe to say that the work that the district, through Maggie, and the work that's being done through our district's equity committee, that they have spent additional funding on some of the programming? I'm guessing that has been done at the district level.
Yes, things that are done at the school district and is only for students has been paid for out of district funds. So some of the assemblies that have happened, some of the on-site programs that have happened, and some of the work that we've done for representation in the school community, those have all come out of our Fund 10
So my
budget.
point in being is that the work is still continuing. It's just kind of shifted somewhat.
So in the strategic plan, you have 2 strategic priorities that are aligned with extensions of the Welcoming Diversity Action Plan work, and those were areas that were supported by the recalibration of the work team and the survey and other pieces of the plan. So then in the report, the majority of the group supported restructuring that committee to continue to be an administrative committee with quarterly meetings and to post those meetings publicly. And then they set up and described a process by which people on that committee could be replaced. So they were proposing a committee of 10 members that were representative stakeholders in the group. So that is what was, that's the structure revision that is brought forward from the majority of that group of 5 that remains.
And your recommendation is, I'm looking for you.
Could I interject? Would that be all right?
Sure.
So I've been on the committee since the beginning. First of all want to thank everyone that's been a part of it. I know, Jackie, you were definitely from the groundwork. Kim, we had several people, as Kim mentioned. There were 12 people that were part of that steering committee, but then there were many other people that were behind. And over the time period, the membership as far as the steering committee kind of has waned somewhat. My recommendation, just from being involved, and I know, Kim, you're probably going to maybe say more to this or not, but I think given that the district, through our strategic priorities, is doing this work, I feel that it would be prudent at this time for us to put a pause on this segregated committee. Mainly because there could be some redundancy, and we want to make sure that we've got the focus where it needs to be. So in order to move the work forward, that would be what I would suggest. I don't know where you want to go with it, but just in being active. And again, I want to say thank you to everyone that's been part of that work. It was definitely a springboard for where we're going with this work, I think.
Kathy, is your thought that would be integrated into some of our other community teams that are being formed? And
yeah, well, through our strategic priorities, and Kim can kind of touch on this, that this work is being done, and I don't know if you want to highlight any of that.
Yeah, I guess I would. I appreciate everything that you just said, Kathy, and I would agree with you. And Thor, to your question, you're right. We do have a number of I don't want to say community organizations, but we do have a number of community
groups,
focus groups that we work with. I think and because we do have a strategic plan that has diversity and equity involved, we need to make sure that those groups are representative of our community. Now, I think we've done a good job of it, but it probably is a good, it's a good opportunity to just reflect and make sure that those groups are representative of our community.
I think those people who have been engaged in the Welcoming Diversity Action Plan work should be invited and welcome to continue engage in the work through some of our advisory teams. So I have a citizen advisory team. Jonathan has a citizen finance team. Maggie has an equity network, and Rachel just began her her special education advisory team. And so I don't want to lose the insight and the perspective of those people who step forward around that work. And so it's important that in whatever way we do it, that those voices continue to be engaged in the work, that we don't disregard their voices, but we elevate them in the work that we're doing. But the group that met, the majority said that they'd like to continue that structure. I can certainly continue to engage their voices in other ways.
And from my perspective, I looked at it a little bit at this point in time as a sort of a duplication of services, because certainly when this committee and the action plan was launched, there was pretty much nothing going on. And now we have so much going on. We even have an equity director. So I feel like the funds should be, allocated towards some of the strategic plans, initiatives, and though I want to clarify that Maggie is Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and then also equity. So that's just my 2 cents.
All right, any other feedback or questions?
So clarification, the funding that has been levied, there's $25,000 that's levied as part of Fund 80. So that money, which we haven't really addressed in time, if there's programs or things of that nature that benefit the community, then we have this process by which we do it with this committee. That what I'm hearing from you is that committee no longer is, you're not wanting that committee to lift that money forward, but that money, if needed for community programming, could be accessed. So like the Martin Luther King essay contest.
Yeah, so I think, we definitely had some good things in place that I can see moving forward, but I think the structure-wise to just put a pause on, because it is a segregated committee separate from what we are kind of moving towards with our strategic priorities.
And I think to add to that is that when this group was originally formed, the schools provided some funding, the village provided some funding. This group was going to be able to obtain some outside resources going forward. As it becomes more and more just school funded, it makes sense that we do have Fund 80, but that it's whether it's the schools or the community services or the park and recreation that administration looks to identify the funding in support of these initiatives.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. Any other questions?
And is Noelle still awake? Or?
She's awake.
I know she hates long meetings.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Does that give you the direction that you're looking for?
Yeah, does that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. We already heard from the student board member report. Legislative update. Do you have a brief update for us?
Yeah, I'll make it really brief. I have some points here. We already know that 95% of the ESSER funding, Wisconsin's ESSER 3 funding, has been allocated, or is in the process of being allocated to the school districts. Then Governor Evers just signed Senate Bill 449 into law. This law allows critical incident mapping, and this would be a Steve Lotus thing as he deals with the safety plan, but basically that the mapping data to be submitted in lieu of school blueprints, which school districts had to submit before to the safety plan, to the Office of School Safety. So it's just kind of streamlining that for, because it was pretty cumbersome, I think, to do the safety plans, or it not only was, but it is. Just a quick note on the resolutions to be considered at the 2022 WASB Delegate Assembly are now posted online, so we'll probably get those here soon, but for everyone to take a look, there's only 5 of them this year. I will be introducing the Gifted and Talented or Advanced Learning one at the convention. And then the IDA Full Funding Act was reintroduced on November 16th. This bill reflects an effort to finally ensure Congress fully meets its longstanding commitment to fund special education. So that's what I alluded to a little bit before, that the special ed is the largest single unfunded mandate in the state of Wisconsin right now. And just to touch on that, our Senator Tammy Baldwin is actually among the Senate co-sponsors of this bill, and they're trying to get Congress to commit to pay 40% of the extra costs for educating special ed students. So hopefully we get more than lip service on that, but that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Any committee or calendar updates, given that we're at the end of a long meeting and at the end of the calendar year? Anything that anyone wants to share?
There's a winter break beginning Wednesday.
Winter break starts on Wednesday.
Yep.
And then I would just encourage my fellow board members to continue to take advantage of the online classes offered through WASB.
Well, especially our online learning platform.
Yeah, our online
we paid for, so.
Very good. All right, we are at the end of the meeting, and we are adjourned for our families that are celebrating Christmas. Or
Merry Christmas.
Kwanzaa.
Feliz Navidad.
Have a Merry Christmas, have a joyous Kwanzaa, and to all of our families, have a Happy New Year. Happy and healthy New Year. We are adjourned.